Hey there, and welcome back. Settle into the quiet of your own room and let the hard edges of the day grow less important. Rest your hands for a moment, as if there is nothing left for them to carry tonight. Tonight, I want to take you to a small Scottish cottage near the end of the 15th century, when a Stuart king rules from far away, but the local laird, the landholder above your household, is the one whose rent is counted in grain, hens, and days of work. You are Mairi, born in a colder glen to the west, and brought here 3 winters ago by marriage to Yuan, whose mother, Una, still knows where every peg and pot belongs. This low house is not a place you are visiting. It is the roof you help keep decent, fed, and ready for morning, when the laird's grieve may come to reckon what the household owes. Dusk finds you outside the door, with a wooden pail pulling at your fingers and the sour green smell of kail on your sleeves. The cottage sits low against the weather, with stone at its foot, turf packed into the walling, and thatch darkened by years of smoke. Behind you, the strip of field and the little kail yard lose their colour first. Ahead of you, the lintel is so low that your body already knows to bend. A hen scratches under the dike where she should not be. The byre side shifts with the weight of cattle, and from inside comes the muffled sound of Una setting iron near the hearthstone. Beyond that doorway wait the first small reckonings of the night. Where to set the pail without spilling, how much meal remains under the cloth, and whether the peat stacked near the wall is enough to keep the pot going until morning. Supper waits in kail, oats, and careful salt. Wool waits on the distaff whenever your hands are not washing bowls or steadying a child. The cattle beyond the partition shift, as if the house has a second breathing body. When sleep finally comes, it will come after work has been folded away, piece by piece, under a roof where family, rent, weather, and rest sit closer together than any modern room would allow. Before we cross that threshold, tell me where you are listening from tonight, and what time it is there, as if your own room and this dark Scottish doorway are briefly sharing the same quiet. Your comments mean a lot to me. I read your comments and try to answer as many as I can, especially when you tell me which old households, kitchens, roads, cottages, or winter rooms you want to visit next. If you like being carried into the past in this slow, close way, please subscribe, and then we will lower our heads under the lintel and step inside. Your shoulder turns before your feet do. The pail is held away from your skirt, because one knock against the doorpost would slop the water over your hem, and there is no pleasure in kneeling later with wet wool against the skin. The doorway accepts no proud body. It makes everyone bow Yuan when he brings in fuel, Una with her old back, the children when they forget and thump their foreheads. Even the grieve if he comes tomorrow with mud on his boots and another household's dues already in his head. A cottage like this is not built to impress him. It is built to keep wind out, smoke moving upward when it will, and heat from escaping faster than peat can be spared. The first breath indoors is thicker than the air outside. It carries ash, damp wool, old thatch, sour milk, cattle hide, and the last sharpness of chopped greens. For a moment your sight gives you very little. The evening behind you has been grey, but the room before you is almost black near the rafters, where years of smoke have climbed and settled until the beams look as if they were rubbed with soot by hand. You know the house by other means first. The worn edge of the threshold under your sole, the wall close enough to brush your sleeve, the lifted peg where Yuan's belt sometimes hangs, the place where the earth floor dips just after the entrance, packed hard by feet, broom, spilled water, and winter mud. You lower the pail to the ground with both hands, not because it is grand or fragile, but because it is needed. Wood cracks, hoops, loosen, water spills, and every useful thing in the house has already served longer than a pretty thing ever would. The pail settles beside the wall, where it will not be kicked when the room fills with movement. Your fingers open slowly from the handle. The bent wood has left a pale crease across the skin below your knuckles, and the relief of letting go is so ordinary that no one marks it. In this house, tired hands are not an event. They are simply part of evening. The floor is not level enough for carelessness. Near the hearth it is drier and firm, where ash has been swept and the heat has drawn damp out of the packed clay. Closer to the door, grit clings to the soles, and a trace of the yard has come in with you. In summer the floor would smell of dust, sour spills, and dried rushes when there are rushes to spare. Tonight it holds the cold from outside, and the cold rises through your shoes before the fire reaches you. A cottage floor like this is made by use as much as by building. Feet press it, knees mark it, water darkens it, brooms scratch it back into order. Una is a shape beside the hearth, before she is a face. Her arm moves and iron answers stone with a dull touch. She does not need to look over to know whether you have set the pail rightly. That was one of the first lessons after you came from the Western Glen. Not the words of it, but the pause when a thing was in the wrong place, the way an older woman could make a misplaced bowl feel louder than speech. 3 winters ago, the room had seemed too low, too close, full of other people's habits. Now your own body turns within those habits, almost before thought. You duck where you once forgot. You reach where a stranger would search. Above you, the rafters hold the darkness in layers. From one peg hangs a folded plaid, rough and familiar at the edge. From another, a leather thong, a little bundle of dried herbs, and a wooden ladle, darkened at the handle by many hands. A net bag sags with something too useful to throw away. Near the wall, the curve of a basket waits for wool or kindling or whatever the next task demands. Nothing here is arranged for display. The hanging things are high enough to save them from children, dogs, damp, and accident, low enough that an adult can reach without wasting time. The room has learned thrift as surely as the people in it have. As your eyes adjust, the hearth becomes the first true centre. Not bright, not generous, but alive. A peat edge glows under ash, the pothook hangs above it, and a low redness shows where Una has kept the fire from spending itself too quickly. There is no chimney breast, like a later house might have. No clean channel, carrying smoke away from the faces below. Smoke finds its own patience. It climbs, gathers, seeks a darker opening above, and leaves its mark on roof, hair, wool, and throat. It stings when the wind presses wrong, and comforts when the air is still. That is the bargain. Warmth, food, and smoke come together. The doorway behind you remains a narrow bar of dusk until the door covering is pulled nearer its place. For a moment, the outside and inside share the same breath. You hear the hen again beyond the wall, then the heavier shift of cattle from the byre side, then the house closing itself around the sounds it owns. This is how the evening narrows. Field, yard, wall, threshold, one room. The open land does not vanish, because the rent comes from it, the food comes from it, the weather threatens it, and tomorrow's labour waits there. But after the lintel, the land enters only as mud on a shoe, greens in a pot, water in a pail, wool on a distaff, and peat smoke under the roof. You stand just inside, letting the house return to you piece by piece. The corner where the children can be kept farthest from sparks. The chest where meal sits under cloth. The bench that belongs to no one and everyone, depending on the hour. The place where Una's footstool settles because she has settled there for years. Your own place is less fixed, because your work crosses the room. Door to pail, pail to pot, pot to board, child to corner, wool to hand, ashes to hearth. To belong here is not to possess a room of your own, it is to know where your body is needed before anyone has to ask. The pail no longer pulls at your fingers, but the work it carried has only changed form. Water must be guarded from dirt. The pot must be watched. The doorway must be made fast enough against the wind and loose enough for Yuan when he comes in with the last peats. The house has taken you from the dusk, bent you under its lintel, and placed you back among its reckonings. In the low dark, with smoke over your head and the earth floor underfoot, the cottage does not greet you with beauty. It greets you with use. And because you know that use, because your hands remember it now, the first part of the evening has begun. The room answers you by habit, before it answers by sight. Your feet find the firmer path beaten between doorway and hearth, where the earth has been pressed by years of souls, damp hems, dropped ash, and children running too near before being turned away. Near the wall, the floor is colder and less certain. Closer to the hearthstone, it holds a faint stored heat, not enough to comfort the whole body, but enough for your toes to notice through worn leather. You shift the pail to the place where it will not be kicked in passing. Because in a house like this, even water must have a proper place. Too near the door and grit will find it, too near the children, and half of it will be lost before supper. Too far from the pot, and you will carry it again when your hands have already filled themselves with other work. The cottage has only one main room, but it is not one thing. It is kitchen, workroom, store, sitting place, sleeping place. Shelter from weather, shelter for tempers, and the place where a family becomes visible to itself at the end of the day. Modern privacy would not know where to stand here. There is no clean division between cooking and mending, between children and tools, between food and fuel, between the old woman's authority and your own younger strength. Everything has to live close to everything else. And so the room is not arranged by comfort first. It is arranged by need. The hearthstone sits low and dark at the centre of that need. It is not grand, not raised like the hearth of a better house, not framed for beauty. It is a working place, blackened at the edges, dusted with old ash, with the iron set where Una has left it, and the pot waiting for the next demand. Around it, the room takes shape in rings. Nearest the fire are the things that must be heated, watched, dried, softened, or kept safe from damp. A little farther back are the stools, the children, the wool, the bowls, the folds of plaid that serve 1 hour as clothing and another as bedding. At the walls are the things that can be hung up away from feet. A wooden ladle, a twist of cord, a tool with a worn handle, a child's cap, a strip of cloth saved, because no strip of cloth is nothing. You know the room by these heights as much as by its corners. What hangs on a peg belongs to work that must be found quickly. What lies in the chest belongs to food, cloth, or the little guarded privacy a household can afford. What rests on the bench belongs to whoever has use of it now. The bench near the wall is not a drawing room seat, not a place of leisure separated from labour. It is where a bowl can be set down, where a child can be placed out of the way, where Una can rest one hip while testing whether your bannock dough has been made too wet, where a neighbour might sit for the span of a borrowed tool if the evening allows it. The same plank receives wear from elbows, bowls, damp cloth, and tired bodies. That is how a room such as this keeps memory, not in portraits or carved panels, but in polish made by use. Una's place is easiest to see because no one has named it aloud for years. Her stool sits near enough to the hearth for her knees, far enough from sparks for the wool tucked at her side, and angled so she can see most of the room without seeming to watch it. She has no title here that a clerk would write down. She is not mistress of a hall, not lady of land, not the person to whom rent is paid, yet the cottage still bends around her knowledge. The pothook goes where her hand expects it. The good bowl is not set where a child might crack it. The folded plaid that belongs to Ewan's father before him, now worn thin along one edge, is not thrown among the rougher things. Her authority is ordinary and therefore strong. It lives in correction before speech, in the glance that makes a younger hand move an object half a span to the better place. The children have been put toward the safest corner, though no corner in such a house is truly separate. One of them sits with knees drawn under a patched kirtle, watching the room from the place where smoke thins and stray sparks are least likely to travel. Another has a wooden scrap and turns it as if it were a tool of consequence. Their bodies are part of the room's ordering too. Too near the door, they would be in the path of mud and cold. Too near the hearth, they would be in danger. Too near the meal chest, they would be temptation itself. So they are placed where adult eyes can find them without searching, where Una's foot can warn without rising, where your own skirt can brush a shoulder as you pass. You cross the room not as a visitor would, choosing a pleasant route, but as someone whose body has learned a map of interruption. A bowl is in the wrong place, so your fingers shift it. A stool stands out from the wall, so your ankle nudges it back. The pail needs a cover, the cover is under a folded plaid, and the plaid must not be dragged through ash. Every movement corrects 3 future troubles. In a cottage with little spare space, tidiness is not neatness for its own sake. It is safety. It is food preserved from dirt, wool preserved from sparks, tools preserved from being lost in shadow, children preserved from harm, tempers preserved from the small irritations that grow when bodies are shut indoors with weather pressing at the roof. The meal chest waits against the wall, squat and plain, its wood darkened by hands rather than polish. It is one of the room's quiet borders. A child may lean against it, a bowl may rest on it for a moment, but everyone understands that it is not just another surface. Inside are the grains that make tomorrow possible. Meal for porridge, meal for bannocks. Perhaps a little better flour if the season or the household's luck has allowed it. You do not lift the cloth yet. That reckoning belongs to the next part of the evening, when appetite and duty will both ask their questions. For now, the chest is presence enough. It reminds the room that food is not an endless stream from some unseen place. It is grown, owed, ground, guarded, stretched, and eaten with memory. Wooden bowls sit nested near the board, each one carrying small signs of rank only the household would notice. The smoother one goes first to the elder, or to the person whose need carries weight that night. A rougher bowl can serve a child. A chipped rim is turned away from the mouth by habit. There are horn spoons, a cup shared more often than modern comfort would choose, and a ladle with a handle dark from steam and fingers. These objects are not poor because they are few. They are valuable because they are few. If one breaks, the loss is not decoration. It is inconvenience, expense, and another little demand on a household already measured by grain, fuel, labour, weather, and dues. Along the wall pegs, the folded plaids give the cottage a muted colour after the grey of dusk. Brown wool, dull green, a strip with a faded line that once looked brighter when it came from your own kin. Cloth is never only cloth here. A plaid can warm a body outdoors, cover a sleeper, pad a chest, wrap a child, shield shoulders from draught, or be folded to show that the room has been brought into order for the evening. You notice the one that has slipped, its edge hanging too near the floor, and you lift it before it can take damp from the earth. That gesture is so small, no one needs to mark it. Yet this is how a household keeps itself from decline. By lifting what has slipped, covering what must be kept clean, finding use in what is worn but not finished. The cottage has no room set aside for women, yet much of what keeps it alive passes through women's hands. Wool waits for the distaff because thread is needed always. A torn sleeve waits for repair because cloth is dear. A child's hair needs smoothing, a pot needs watching, a board needs wiping. A bowl needs rinsing with as little water as will do the work. You are not merely filling hours between supper and sleep. You are holding the room in working order, and that order is a kind of wealth. Not the wealth of coin, not the wealth a laird counts in land, but the wealth of a house where each thing can be found when darkness thickens. For a moment you see how crowded the room would look to someone newly brought over the threshold, cattle close beyond the partition, smoke dark above, children, tools, food, bedding, wool, stools, pots, peats, water, bowls, old Una on her accustomed seat, and you moving between them with your sleeves already marked by the day. Yet, from inside the life of it, the crowding is not confusion. It is an arrangement made by necessity and repeated until it becomes familiar. The room has no empty space kept for show. Empty space would be a luxury and a strange one. Space must earn its keep like everyone else. The safest corner takes the children. The driest wall takes the meal chest. The pegs take what must not be trodden underfoot. The bench takes passing work. Una's stool takes Una, the hearthstone takes the pot, the ash, the iron, the centre of attention without ever asking for it. And you, Mairi, take the paths between them all. Your place is not fixed, because your work is not fixed. Your belonging is made in movement, turning, lifting, setting down, noticing, preventing, remembering. Outside, the last of the day has thinned beyond the doorway, but inside the room has become more legible. Not brighter. Exactly. More known, a cottage such as this does not need many rooms to hold a life. It needs rules no one has to state, objects that return to their places, hands that remember what comes next, and enough order that darkness can arrive without undoing the evening. You draw the covered pail a little nearer to the wall, clear a place beside the board, and feel the room settle around its many uses. Supper is not ready yet. The reckoning of what remains has not begun. But the one room has gathered everyone and everything it must hold, and for now, that is the first kind of shelter. You do not open the meal chest at once. First, you move the pail clear of the path, wipe the damp from your fingers on the side of your gown, and listen for the pot before you lift the wooden lid. The room has its own order now, and counting food is a task that asks for a little stillness. If a child is too near, a hand on the shoulder turns them away. If a bowl sits on the board, it is moved aside. The chest is not large, but it holds more than food. It holds the measure between tonight and tomorrow, between what your household may eat and what must be kept back because someone above you has a right to ask for it. The cloth over the barley meal is grey at the corners from use. You pinch it up with 2 fingers and fold it back only far enough to see. Meal does not look like much when it lies low in a chest. It has no shape of its own, no promise except what hands can make of it with water, heat, and time. Still, it is the difference between a thin supper and a steadier one. You lower your fingers into it, not deep, just enough to feel how far the surface sits from the rim. The dry grains cling under your nails. They are cool where the air has not reached them. Una does not need to come closer. From her stool, she sees the angle of your shoulder and the length of your paws. And that is nearly as good as seeing inside the chest herself. She has counted this way for more years than you have lived in the house. Before you came here as Ewan's wife, you counted in your father's house in the Western Glen, where the wind came harder and the fields gave their answer later. Here, you had to learn another household's measures, how much Yuan's mother called enough, how low she allowed the chest to go before her mouth tightened, how long a sack lasted when rain kept everyone indoors and children seemed always to be hungry. A little tally stick lies along the inside edge, darkened where fingers have handled it. It is nothing grand, only a narrow piece of wood with notches cut into it, but it keeps memory from becoming argument. One mark for what has been promised, one for what has been sent, one for what remains. Men may speak of rents as rights and lands and old agreements, but here, in the cottage, rent has the feel of a thumb against cut wood. It has the sound of a lid being lifted. It is barley meal held back when the pot could take more. It is a hen remembered before she is caught. The laird himself is far enough away that you do not picture his face often. He belongs to the hall, to the better roof, to men who ride with purpose and have other men stand aside for them. But his reach comes into this room without needing his body. It arrives through his grieve, the officer who reckons dues and work owed by the households on the land. It arrives at harvest, when a portion is not yours to keep. It arrives when men are called for labour on the laird's fields, or when a cart must be helped, or when a bird, a measure of grain, or a day's work is expected, because the land you use is not free of claim. That is the plain arrangement of your world. The cottage shelters you, but the ground beneath it belongs upward as well as outward. Your family works strips of field, keeps beasts, cuts fuel, tends kail, mends tools, saves seed, and prays the weather will not turn mean at the wrong time. Yet some part of what the household makes must move away from the house. Not because anyone here has eaten too well, because this is how power is felt when power lives nearby. not as a crown in a distant town, but as a quantity named at the door. Your fingers brush the chest bottom near one corner, and the contact gives you the answer before your eyes do. There is still meal enough, but not meal to be careless with. The cloth goes back over it. You smooth it once more from habit than need. The gesture keeps the surface clean and marks the food as something tended. A loose spill would be a waste, and waste has a way of accusing the person nearest it. Near the wall, the hen makes herself known by absence. Not in sound, not yet, but in the space your mind keeps for her. The brown one, with the pale nick near the comb, has been counted already in your head, because she lays well enough, and because a bird can become supper, rent, exchange, or promise, depending on who is standing at the threshold. You saw her outside by the dike, scratching where she should not, and you remember to ask Yuan later with a look, not with words, whether she has been brought close enough for morning. A hen is not simply a hen when dews are near. She is feathers, eggs, broth, and obligation, walking on two quick feet. The children know some of this without knowing the names for it. They know that when the chest is open, they must not dip a hand in. They know the better crust does not always go to the hungriest mouth. They know that adults can grow attentive around ordinary things. A tied sack, a covered bowl, the sound of boots outside. In a household like this, learning begins before explanation. A child sees what is saved, what is shared, what is hidden from damp, and what must be produced when someone with authority asks. You set the tally stick on the board and turn it so the notches catch what little light remains. Una's eyes rest on it. There is no accusation in her watching, and no comfort offered either. She is measuring with you. That is one of the ways age holds authority in a cottage. Not by raising a voice, not by claiming a chair like a throne, by remembering the year the oats failed early, the winter when a cow went dry, the season when too much was promised and the house had to tighten itself for weeks afterward. Her silence is a storehouse. You have learned not to mistake it for emptiness. The notches do not tell the whole truth, of course. They do not mark the handfuls used when a child was ill and needed something softer. They do not mark the meal shaken from a cloth into the pot because no one could bear to waste it. They do not mark the pride of what is owed without looking ruined by it. Still, the stick helps. It gives the household a way to face tomorrow without letting worry become smoke in every corner. You think of the grieve as he looked the last time he stood near the doorstone, mud on his lower hose. His posture plain, with the knowledge that he did not need to ask twice. He was not cruel, that almost made the visit more ordinary. Cruelty would have been a story. This was only business, and business could empty a house just as surely if the year had been poor. The dues were named, the marks were checked, the animals noticed, and when he left, the room seemed to have less air for a while. Tomorrow may bring only a reminder, or nothing, or a request that must be met, because refusing is not a choice a household like yours can easily afford. So you count without panic. Panic wastes strength. You have kail, meal, a little salt, the work of your hands. Una's memory. Yuan's back, the animals behind the partition, and the old knowledge that no evening is solved all at once. You close the chest lid carefully, keeping the cloth from catching. The wood settles with a low sound. That sound is final for now, and the room accepts it. Afterward, you move differently. Not heavier exactly, but more exact. The ladle will take less than hunger asks for. The bannock, when it comes, will be broken with tomorrow in mind. A child may receive a softened edge from your fingers, but not so much that the board tells on you. This is the kind of arithmetic no clerk writes down. It lives in wrists, glances, pinches, and portions. It is women's work because women are nearest the pot, and therefore nearest the truth of what remains. Una shifts on her stool, and the spindle at her side taps once against the wood. The sound loosens the moment. The chest is shut, the tally is known, the brown hen is kept in memory. Outside, evening has gone a shade darker, and inside the hearth asks to be tended again. You tuck the tally stick back along the chest edge, where it will wait like a thin bone of the household's memory. Then you turn toward the pot, towards smoke, towards supper, carrying the count inside you now, not as fear, but as one more thing a house must know before it can sleep. The smoke meets you before the pot does. It leans down from the roof in a low blue-brown layer, held there by the black ribs of the rafters and the old thatch above them. You do not look up for long, because looking up makes your eyes fill faster, but you know every stain overhead. The roof has been taking smoke for years. Straw, heather, turf, and soot have become one darkened skin, thick with the life of meals. Winters, births, sick days, wet boots, drying wool, and mornings when the fire had to be coaxed from a breath of red under ash. There is no chimney to pull the air cleanly away. A cottage like this cannot spend stone, lime, labour, and height on comfort, the way a laird's house might. The hearth sits in the middle, because the heat must serve everyone. The pot, the hands, the children, the old woman on her stool, the damp clothes, the animals close by, and the floor where sleep will later be made. Smoke rises, because smoke must rise. But it finds its own road. Some of it slips through the smoke hole in the roof. Some works out through thatch and cracks. Some comes back down and stays with you. You bend to the hearthstone and use the edge of a worn stick to draw the ash aside. The pale powder shifts in a soft scrape, exposing the deeper heat beneath. Peat does not blaze like dry wood. It darkens, glows, crumbles, and gives itself slowly. That is why it matters. Cut from wet ground in the better season, stacked, dried, carried, guarded from rain, it is not only fuel now. It is time saved from past labour and spent tonight in careful pieces. Against the wall, the air is colder. You can see it when Una breathes out, a faint whitening that vanishes almost at once. At the hearth, your face prickles and your shins feel the heat through your skirts. The cottage is not evenly warm. Nothing in it is even. Light lies in strips, where the doorway, smoke hole, and gaps under the eaves allow it. Shadow thickens behind hanging tools. A wooden bowl beside the chest is visible at its rim and gone at its base. The whole room seems made of degrees. Warmer here, colder there, clearer below, stinging above. Safer by the work, darker along the wall. You lift the pot chain with 2 fingers wrapped in cloth, easing the hook down a notch. Iron complains in a dull click. The pot settles closer to the heat, and the surface within gives one slow movement, not yet boiling, only gathering itself. That chain is one of the strong things in the house. It hangs from above, like a black line joining roof and meal, smoke and supper, the hidden timber overhead and the kail that must soften before everyone eats. If the pot sits too high, the food waits too long. If it sits too low, the bottom catches. And the taste of burning follows every spoon. Your mother knew this kind of judgment before she ever taught it to you. In the colder glen where you were born, the houses crouched much the same, and smoke marked the rafters there, as it does here. You remember being a girl with your eyes running, while older women moved through the sting as if it were weather. They did not praise it. They did not pretend it was pleasant. They only learned how to turn their faces, where to stand, which peat smoked worst, how to open the door long enough to clear the worst of it without giving the whole room back to the cold. Now your own body knows those answers. You kneel lower, below the thickest air. You shift the peat with the stick, tucking the better burning edge inward. A ribbon of smoke folds toward you, and for a moment your eyes burn sharply enough that the room blurs. You blink, wait, and breathe through your mouth. The taste is bitter, earthy, almost damp, like the ground remembering the bog it came from. Your sleeve smells of it already. Your hair will hold it through the night. Tomorrow, even outside in clean air, the cottage will still be on you. Anna does not need to tell you to sweep the ash away from the side where the child might come too close. You do it, because this is how a room is kept usable. The hearth has no fence fine enough to trust entirely. Safety is made by habit, ash drawn here, ember kept there, pot handle turned inward, stool placed where an old knee expects it, little feet watched whenever the light changes. The centre of the house gives life, but it is never harmless. Above you, the smoke hole is only partly obedient. In fairer weather, it draws better. On damp evenings, or when the wind presses the roof from the wrong side, smoke lingers and lowers until everyone wears it. Tonight it is bearable, though not kind. A grey strand rises from the peat, pauses under the rafters, then thins toward the opening. Beyond it, the last outdoor light appears cold and narrow. The sky is not seen as sky from here, only as a paler place where smoke is allowed to leave. That is the wisdom and the discomfort of the building. It wastes little. The same smoke that stings your eyes helps darken and dry what hangs above. A scrap of meat, when there is meat, can take the smoke and keep longer than it would in clean air. Damp thatch is discouraged from rotting too quickly by the slow passing of heat. Insects do not love the black upper dark. The roof suffers, but it also works. The house has been made to accept irritation as payment for preservation. You draw your hand across your cheek with the back of your wrist, leaving a faint mark where ash has touched sweat. The air lower down is clearer, and this is one reason people sit and work close to the floor. Stools are low, the board will be low. Children learn the better air before they know why they prefer it. A stranger might come through the door and think the room dark, poor, and half choked. You would not say they were wrong, but they would not yet know how much the smoke is doing, how much heat is being held under this roof, how many tasks gather themselves around one central place because there is no fuel to spare for any other. The ash must be kept too. Nothing that can serve is dismissed too quickly. Some ash will help scour. Some will lie over embers later, keeping them alive under a grey cover until morning. If the fire dies completely in the night, the next day begins harder. A coal may be borrowed from a neighbour, but borrowing has its own weight. It means another doorway, another witness to your need, another small mark in the account that villagers keep without writing down. So you shape the hearth as if shaping tomorrow. Peat inward, ash outward, pot lowered, smoke watched. The movements are modest, but they hold the evening together. Anna's spindle resumes its muted turn behind you, the sound almost hidden under the low simmer starting in the pot. The cattle shift beyond the partition, and their movement presses a deeper smell into the room, hide and bedding beneath the peat and kail. The house is never one scent. It is layers of what keeps it alive. For a little while, you remain on your heels, letting the heat reach your fingers. The skin across your knuckles is rough from water, wool, cold air, and work that never entirely leaves the hand. Near the wall, the chill waits. Near the centre, the hearth answers it. Not generously, not beautifully in the way a story might make it. It answers in the way this house can afford, with a smoking peat, a blackened roof, a pot that begins at last to murmur, and enough warmth for those who know where to gather. The light thins again. Smoke softens the edges of the rafters until they seem farther away than they are. You blink once more, not from sorrow, only from the sting. Everyone here accepts as part of supper. Then you reach for the ladle, test the pot, and listen to the first fuller sound of kail moving through hot water. The count in the chest remains what it was. The rent beyond the door remains what it is. But in the middle of the cottage, under the roof that holds both smoke and shelter, the evening has taken one step toward feeding the household. The first sound from the byre is not loud enough to interrupt supper, but your body hears it before your mind has finished with the pot. A hoof presses down through bedding, a tether creaks against the post. Then comes the heavy breath of the cow, damp and close behind the rough timber screen. As if another person has shifted in the room and asked for space without words. You keep the ladle in your hand and turn only your head. The partition is no true wall. It is a line of split boards, old wattling, and patched gaps. Built high enough to keep the beasts from the hearth, and low enough for their smell, breath, and warmth to pass through. In a house like this, the byre is not an outbuilding set cleanly apart. It belongs under the same roof, or close enough to share the shelter. Because cattle are too valuable to leave lightly to weather, thieves, or a winter night. The cow moves again, and the leather at her neck gives a dry pull. Behind the screen, the bedding sighs under her weight. Old straw, rush, and dung have been trodden together into a thick floor that will be forked out when there is enough of it to matter. Nothing from the animals is only waste. The manure will go to the strips of ground when the season allows it, worked back into the soil that must feed kail, berry, oats, and the hope of another year. Even the smell has work inside it, though it reaches you first as a blunt, living force. Your younger child drifts toward the screen, drawn by the movement and the dark shape beyond the gaps. You do not need a word. You shift your shoulder, lift 2 fingers from the ladle, and point the child back toward the safer side of the hearth. The warning is understood because it has been given many times before. A cow is familiar, but she is not harmless. A hoof can come down wrong. A horn can knock a child against timber. Affection in this house often looks like a hand placed firmly between curiosity and harm. Una does not turn from her spindle, but her head changes angle. She has heard the same sound and judged it already. If the beast were tangled, if the tether had slipped, if the breath behind the boards had changed from rest to strain, she would know. Years in this cottage have trained her ear past ordinary noise. She can hear the difference between a cow shifting bedding and a cow worrying the rope. She can hear a hen under the wall, rain in the thatch, a child too near the ash, and the thin change in a pot just before it catches. You set the ladle across the rim and wipe your fingers on your kirtle. Straw has travelled into the living side of the room again, clinging to feet, hems, and the cracks in the packed earth floor. You stoop and gather what you can without making a task large enough to steal time from the pot. This is the boundary between home and byre, not a clean line, but a thing remade all evening by hands. Sweep a little, lift a child away, nudge a bowl farther from the screen, hang a cloth where the beast cannot nose it through a gap. The smell thickens as the room grows darker. Peat smoke lies above, animal warmth pushes from the side, and between them is the human air of damp wool, kail, skin, wood, and ash. It is not pleasant in the way a later house would want a room to be pleasant. It is protective. The cow's body gives heat that the walls cannot make for themselves. Her nearness helps hold the winter back. Her milk, when she is giving it, changes thin porridge into something kinder. Her manure feeds the ground. Her calf, if there is one, and it lives, may become rent, sale, breeding, traction, or food in a harder season. So you notice her the way you notice the meal chest, with regard sharpened by need. The laird's rent may be counted in grain and hens, but everyone understands that cattle carry another kind of worth. A household with even one good cow stands differently in the world from a household with none. She is not treasure in a locked coffer. She is treasure that breathes, soils bedding, needs fodder, falls ill, must be led, guarded, milked, watched, and kept from breaking what little the house owns. The byre end is darker than the hearth end. Through a gap between 2 boards, you catch the dull shine of hide, not black exactly, but the colour of rain-soaked earth. The animal's flank lifts and sinks. Her breath comes with a wet, muffled sound. Sometimes, on colder nights, vapour gathers around her muzzle, and the whole byre seems to breathe like a bank of mist. Tonight the air is damp enough to cling without showing itself. It settles in your hair and in the cloth at your neck. You remember the first winter after you came here, when the closeness of the animals made you wake before dawn with your heart beating too high. In your birth glen, your mother's house had its own ways, its own smells, its own order of bodies and work. Here, Yuan's mother had already set the rules long before you entered as a wife. The cow was tied there. The bedding was turned this way. The good rope hung on that peg and no other. The milk vessel was never set near the ash. You learned by watching, by being corrected with a glance, by making one mistake only once, if you could help it. Now your own hands follow the house's scents. You lift a folded scrap of sacking from where the child has dragged it near the partition. You tuck it higher on a peg. You check the wooden bowl set close to the floor, because anything within reach of a curious muzzle may be tipped, licked, cracked, or lost. The cow's head shifts behind the screen. Her ear knocks lightly against timber. One board answers with a hollow tap, and the child looks up again, wanting to laugh, but your raised palm settles the moment before it grows too bright. There is comfort in the animal's nearness, but not the tender kind people might imagine from far away. It is an agreement made from necessity. The family gives the beasts roof, bedding, stored fodder when there is fodder to spare, and the last inspection before sleep. The beasts give milk, dung, labour, calves, and heat. They also give trouble. They bring flies in season. They sour the air. They take space in a house that already has little room for people. They remind you that farm work does not stop at the threshold. It follows you indoors and stands breathing behind a partition while the supper pot thickens. The cow draws on the tether once more, and the leather complains. You move closer, not into the byre yet, only near enough to look through the widest break in the screen. The floor changes under your feet. On the family side, it is hard earth, swept and stamped by years of use. Near the byre, it grows littered, dampened by straw and what clings to it. Your soles feel the difference, even through weariness. One more step would mean the work of animals. Rope, flank, bedding, muck, milk, and the dark space where a beast's eye catches whatever light the hearth can spare. You see that the tether still lies clean against the post. No twist, no leg caught. The cow has only shifted herself deeper into the bedding, making a hollow that will hold her weight for the night. That matters. A standing animal burns strength. A settled one keeps it. You let your gaze travel over the rough lines of the screen. The peg where the milking cord hangs, the forked stick used to push bedding back. The place where straw has been dragged thin and will need attention later. The pot behind you gives a heavier bubble. Una's spindle slows, then resumes. The child, denied the byre, finds the edge of your skirt instead and leans there. Smoky hair against your thigh. For a moment you are held between all the living things under the roof, the old woman keeping thread alive in her fingers, the child learning the room by forbidden edges, the cow breathing out damp warmth behind the boards, and you with your hand half raised, listening for what needs doing next. This is how the cottage measures wealth after dusk. Not by display, not by carved chests or painted cloths or a table set for strangers. It measures wealth by what can be kept alive through the night. A banked peat, a covered meal chest, a cow safe behind a screen, a child far enough from hooves and fire, a pot that has begun to feed the air before it feeds the mouth. You step back from the partition and brush straw from the side of your skirt. It falls in short, pale pieces onto the floor, where some of it will stay until morning, no matter how often you sweep. The byre does not retreat. It remains there, breathing, shifting, making the house larger and more crowded at once. Its smell follows you to the hearth. Its warmth meets the smoke above the room. Its needs wait behind timber, patient but never absent. Then you take up the ladle again. The kail rolls under the surface, darker now, softening into the water. Behind you, the cow lowers her head into the bedding with a thick, satisfied breath. The child stays close to your skirt. Una's spindle turns. The partition holds, imperfectly, which is all a partition in this house can do. On one side, supper gathers itself. On the other, the animals keep their place. And between them, with straw underfoot and smoke above, you keep watch over the narrow line that lets the household remain a household until morning. The ladle, makes its path through the pot, and the room begins to smell less like separate things and more like supper. The sharp green of kail loses its edge. The water thickens a little where the meal has been stirred in. Steam rises against your face, carrying peat smoke, cabbage leaves, oat dust, and the faint sweetness of what little milk has been spared. You do not hurry it. Food cooked too fast is food wasted, and waste is not only a sin of carelessness here, it is hunger arriving earlier than it needs to. So you keep the pot moving from the bottom, where meal can catch if the fire grows too eager, and you watch the surface for the signs your mother taught you before you ever came east to this house. A duller roll, a heavier pull against the wood, greens sinking rather than floating, the pot telling the hand when it is nearly ready. The kail came from the yard beyond the dike, leaves toughened by wind and handled by many evenings like this one. In a richer house, there might be broth with more fat in it, or meat often enough that no child would stare when a bone appeared. In this cottage, meat is remembered by season, by luck, by slaughter, by feast day, by what can be salted, by what must be sold, and by what the household cannot afford to eat simply because it has raised it. A cow is milk and calves and manure before it is ever meat. A hen is eggs and rent and noise at the wall before it is flesh for the pot. So supper is made from what returns. Kail that grows back leaf by leaf. Oats that sit in the chest under cloth. Bear or barley when the field and weather allow it. Way left from cheese making. Sour enough to make the mouth wake. A heel of cheese if the day has been kind. Milk thinned into the pot when there is some. These are not scraps in your mind. They are the ordinary pillars of eating, known by hand, by season, and by the measure of the household. Una shifts the spindle against her knee and watches the pot without seeming to watch. She has cooked this way longer than you have been alive, and her silence can weigh more than correction. You feel it when you reach for the salt. The salt sits in its covered place, guarded not like treasure for display, but like something too useful to squander. It has come from trade, from labour beyond this glen, from hands and roads and payments you will never see. A pinch changes the pot. Too much would be foolish. Too little would leave the greens tasting flat and watery, and a hungry house notices flatness, even when no one complains. You take what your fingers can hold without pride, rub it once between thumb and forefinger, and let it fall in a brief pale scatter. The child at your skirt follows the motion with grave attention. Children learn thrift before they learn the words for it. They learn which cup is filled first, how long to wait, how far from the fire to crouch, which pieces are saved for older teeth, which hunger may be answered, and which must be distracted. A child may not understand rent or harvest, or the laird's rights, but a child knows when the meal chest is opened and when it is closed. Near the hearth, the girdle waits. The iron is dark and plain, set where heat can reach it without stealing too much from the pot. Bannocks will not be light in the way fine. Bread might be light in a burgh house or at a lord's table, where wheat is more likely to appear and ovens may serve many loaves. Here, the bread of the evening is flat, made from meal, water, perhaps a touch of sourness from what stands nearby, shaped by palm and patience. It fills the hand, it steadies the belly, it carries the taste of the grain more honestly than any feast dish could. You draw the meal toward you. The cloth over it has caught a grey dust along its fold. When you lift it, the smell rises dry and plain, a stored smell, not unpleasant, but close to the floor and the chest and the weeks already past. Every handful has a future attached to it. Too much tonight, and tomorrow changes. Too little. And the child wakes before dawn, with need sharpening the room. You do not count aloud. Your fingers know the size of the bannock before your mind names it. Water goes in slowly. The meal darkens, clumps, breaks. Accepts the wet. You turn it with your hand because a hand can judge what a spoon cannot. It should hold together without turning heavy as clay. It should be firm enough, to lift, soft enough to flatten, and not so wet that it wastes heat on the girdle. The dough sticks first to your knuckles, then gives way as you dust it. Your palms leave shallow marks, and for a moment the work is almost soothing. Press, turn, pat, edge, lift. Outside, the evening has lowered further, but inside the meal sets its own time. The pot, the girdle, the cup, the bowls, the child waiting. Anna's spindle, the cow shifting beyond the partition, all of them draw towards supper without needing to be called. You lay the first bannock on the iron. A faint, dry smell comes up. Again meeting heat. The surface changes colour in patches. You watch for the edge to firm, then turn it with your fingers and a bit of wood, quick enough not to burn, measured enough not to tear it. Your hands have learned where heat bites. They have also learned that pain is not always a reason to stop. Sometimes it is only information. In a household like yours, cooking is not separate from accounting. The pot is a ledger without marks. It tells what the field gave, what the cow yielded, what the hens have not yet cost you, what the laird may take, what the church season allows, what weather has delayed, what a woman can stretch without making the stretching visible. No one in the room needs that explained. It is in the way Una keeps her eyes on the meal chest. It is in the way you scrape the last dough from your palm. It is in the way the child is given something to hold before the full bowls are ready, so waiting becomes easier. You take a wooden bowl and warm it near the hearth, not because there is luxury in it, but because a cold bowl steals from thin food. Another bowl sits beside it, and another, each worn smooth in the centre from years of spoons. Horn spoons, wooden spoons, fingers when needed. The household owns what it owns, and no more. A broken bowl is not a small matter. A cracked one is turned, patched if it can be, kept for dry use if it cannot. The kail has softened now. The leaves no longer fight the ladle. Oat or beer meal gives the broth body. Enough that it will cling to the spoon and not run away like green water. If there is whey tonight, it goes in with judgment, a sour brightness that lifts the dullness without making the pot strange. You know the taste before you taste it. Earthy greens, smoke, grain, salt held back, milk or whey, if fortune allows. The whole meal, plain enough to be repeated for a lifetime and still different each evening, because weather changes everything. A richer person might look at this pot and see poverty first. You see labour first. The kail yard weeded before rain. The grain cut, dried, threshed, ground. The cow milked and soothed. The peat dug from wet ground and dried through uncertain weeks. The water carried, the pot scoured, the salt guarded, the hearth kept alive from one need to the next. Nothing in the room arrives as simply as it appears. Another bannock goes onto the girdle. The first rests near the edge of the hearth, covered so it does not harden too quickly. You resist the wish to break a bit from it while it is fresh and hot. That wish is ordinary. Hunger can be quiet and still be present. It can sit behind your ribs with the patience of an animal that knows it will be fed if it waits. Una changes the angle of her stool and draws the child nearer with one hand, keeping the little body away from ash and iron. No words are needed. The child leans into her skirt now instead of yours, and you feel the brief space that opens around your knees. It is enough to lift the pot hook, shift the vessel, and let the boil settle toward serving. Steam beads on your face, your sleeves smell of greens and smoke. A strand of hair has escaped near your cheek, damp from the heat, and you push it back with the cleanest part of your wrist. For a moment, the room seems held by appetite. Even the cow beyond the boards is quieter. The spindle has paused. The child watches the bowls. The hearth throws its low light over the meal chest and the hanging pegs, over Una's hands, over the bannock waiting under cloth. You stir once more from the bottom, slowly, making certain nothing has caught. Then you lift the ladle, and let the first thick fall of kail and grain return to the pot. It lands heavily, with the sound of food ready enough. Not plentiful, not fine. Enough, if divided with sense. Enough, if tomorrow does not ask too much. Enough to carry the household from dusk toward the deeper dark, with the roof above, the animals breathing close, and every person in the room drawn by the same plain comfort, the evening meal, made carefully from little and honoured because it has to serve everyone. The sound comes first as a dull scrape beyond the door, not loud, but different from the animal shifts and the settling of wood inside. Una's head turns before yours does. The child looks toward the threshold. Then the latch lifts, and a stripe of evening air cuts into the room, cold enough to make the steam from the pot seem thicker. Yuan bends under the lintel with the creel dragging at one shoulder and one hand braced against the doorpost. For a moment he is only a dark shape against the last grey of outside. Then he is inside with the smell of wet ground on him, peat dust on his fingers, and his cuffs darkened almost to the elbow. The creel thuds down near the wall, not carelessly, because dried peat can break if it is treated like stone. It is fuel, food, light, and morning, all at once. You move the nearest stool aside with your foot and make room where the wall stays driest. The best blocks are not truly dry. Not after the weather has turned damp again, but they are firm enough to use if they are kept close to the hearth before they are needed. Each one is cut from the moss beyond the worked strips of land, from a place where the earth is dark, spongy, and older than any person in the house. In summer, Yuan and the neighbours slice it out with long irons. Lift it in heavy sods, turn it, stack it, and hope for days when rain does not undo the labour. Tonight, all that old summer work arrives in a creel at your feet. Yuan's hands leave brown-black marks where he grips the top pieces. Peat does not shine like coal, and it does not split like clean wood. It crumbles at the edges and holds the memory of wetness even when it burns. A good block gives a long, low heat. A poor one smokes, hisses, and wastes itself before the pot has done its work. In a cottage like this, you learn the difference with your nose, your eyes, and the patience of waiting for a flame that will not behave like a twig fire. The cold follows him in, sliding along the floor and lifting the edge of your skirt. It changes the room for a few breaths. The child draws back against Una's knee. The cow beyond the partition shifts as if the outside has touched her too. Yuan closes the door with his hip, and the house gathers itself again around the hearth, the pot, the people, the animals, and the new stack of fuel that means the night will not have to be measured so tightly. You take the first blocks from him and set them on their long sides near the stones, leaving space between them so the hearth can draw out the damp. Too close, and they may steam and soften. Too far, and they will be no better by morning. There is a household knowledge in such spacing, learned without anyone making a lesson of it. A girl watches where an older woman sets things. A wife copies what kept the house alive last winter. A man brings in what his back has carried from the stack outside. And every person knows, without counting aloud, that fuel is never only fuel. It is the hidden arithmetic behind every evening meal. The kail pot can hang because peats were cut months ago. The bannock can bake because someone kept the driest pieces back. Child can sleep without waking too often from cold because the embers will be banked with scents. Even the animals depend on it. For a house that loses its fire loses more than comfort. It loses hot water, safe porridge, light for urgent work, and the steadier heart around which the room arranges itself. Yuan's breath eases as the creel empties. His shoulders are damp from the carry, and bits of moss cling to the rough weave of his sleeve. He does not need to tell you the outer stack is lower than he would like. You can see it in the care with which he saves the broken fragments, in the way he tips the creel, so even the dust falls where it can be swept toward the ash. Nothing that can take flame is thrown aside. The smallest pieces will help the morning catch, if they are kept dry enough, Una leans forward from her stool and sorts, with her eyes more than her hands. The older blocks, lighter at the edges, belong nearest the hearth for tonight. The heavier ones, still holding a little field damp, can stand along the wall and wait their turn. Her place in the house shows itself in that glance. She may not have brought the load in, and she may not stand over the pot as long as she once did, but the order of use still passes through her. The room obeys her memory. You shift the bannock cloth farther from the peat dust. Food and fuel live close together in this house, but they must not be careless neighbours. Peat marks everything it touches. It catches under nails, powders the cuff, and darkens the floor where boots crush it. Later, when you wash your hands, the water will cloud brown before it clears. For now, the work matters more than cleanliness. The meal is ready enough, the fuel is inside, and the door can stay shut against the deepening weather. Outside, the last light is thinning behind the turf wall. The cottage no longer feels as if it is waiting to see whether the evening will hold. It has been supplied, not richly, but sufficiently. That difference settles into your body. Your hunger remains, and the pot still must be served, and bowls still must be rinsed afterward with water that cannot be wasted. Yet one worry has stepped back. The fire has a future beyond this meal. Yuan crouches by the wall and sets the final pieces himself, turning each block so the cracked face looks toward the room. His fingers are stiff enough that the movement takes care. The brown-black dust has worked into the lines of his skin, making his hands look older in the firelight. These are the same hands that guide a spade, steady a tether, mend a hurdle, and lift a child away from the door when weather comes in too hard. In a household of this size, work does not divide cleanly into men's tasks and women's tasks once night closes around the walls. It changes shape, passes from one body to another, and returns in the form of food, heat, mended cloth, and animals kept breathing till morning. The creel stands empty now, its bent ribs glistening where rain has touched them. You nudge it nearer the entry, ready to go back outside in the morning. If the weather allows, it must not lie across the floor where a foot may catch it in darkness. Already the room is filling again around its proper things: pot, bowls, stool, child, spindle, wall pegs, drying peat, cattle breath beyond the partition. The new stack makes the house feel less bare. It is not decoration. It is a promise made in blocks of cut earth. You glance toward the pot and see the surface tremble, thick and ready, as the hearth takes the first help from the peat beside it. The flame does not leap, it deepens. A red edge works along one dark block, slow enough to seem almost secret, and the smoke rises with that dense, familiar smell of moor and wet soil turned into heat. It is not sweet, but it belongs here. It has entered your hair. Your sleeves, the rafters, the thatch, the very idea of evening. Yuan straightens, wiping one hand against the side of his tunic before remembering the dust and stopping. The child watches him as if the load itself were a kind of arrival, as important as food. In a way, it is. A cottage is fed by more than what goes into the mouth. It is fed by fuel, by stored grain, by dry thatch, by animals kept close, by hands that return before dark with something useful. You lift the ladle again. The house has made its little adjustment. The door is closed. The last peats are in. The wall has accepted them. The hearth has begun to draw from them. And with the evening changes from waiting to serving, from wondering if there will be enough heat to knowing that, for tonight at least, the meal can be given out under a roof that has gathered all its necessary things close. Una does not rise when the first bowl is ready. Her authority is not in speed. It is in being exactly where the house expects her to be, on the low stool with one foot braced near the hearthstone, her back bent in the familiar shape of years spent leaning toward work. The spindle is tucked into her belt, as if it grew there. Even when her hands are empty, She looks half prepared to draw thread from wool, twist, test, and begin again. You have seen her do it while watching a pot, while minding a child, while listening for weather in the roof. Her fingers seem never fully released from labour. They rest only as tools rest, close to being needed. She watches the pot hook first. Not the pot, not the ladle in your hand. The hook. You have placed it a little too far to one side after stirring, leaving the iron angled where a sleeve might brush it or the chain might swing if the child comes too near. Una says nothing. She lifts her chin, barely, and your own hand moves before pride can harden. You set the hook back in the place it has hung every evening since, before you entered this house, as Iwilen's wife. That is how much of your training has passed between you. By glance, by pause, by the weight of an older woman's silence. In a cottage like this, the rules are not written. They are held in wrists and shoulders, in the memory of where a bowl belongs, in the habit of turning a pot so the strongest heat reaches the thickest part. When you first came from the western glen, you knew work. But not this house's work. Your mother's hearth had drawn differently. Her peats had been cut from another bank. The door there opened to another wind. Here the smoke found its own path. The floor dipped near the meal chest, and Una knew each fault before you had learned to notice it. The child near your skirt sees the correction too. Little eyes move from Una's face to your hand, then to the hook, learning that safety can be carried in the smallest motion. No one needs to frighten a child from the hearth if the adults have already made the hearth legible. Nearer is danger. There is the line the ash does not cross. There is the stool. That should not be dragged into the working space. There is the way a ladle must be set with its bowl turned inward, so a crawling hand finds handle instead of heat. Una's fingers test the edge of a bannock waiting near the girdle. She presses once, not hard. Only enough to judge whether the meal has taken the water properly. The movement is plain, but it holds more knowledge than a measure scratched on wood. In households such as yours, recipes are not kept as treasured writing. They live in women's hands. A little more meal when the air is damp. Less water if the grain was ground finer. A longer rest if the oat has been poor. The difference between food that fills and food that falls apart can be the breadth of one thumb. You hand her the cloth that covered the meal earlier, and she runs it between finger and thumb. Her skin is lined, work-worn, and dry from ash, water, wool grease, and weather. Yet she can still feel what you miss. A wet corner, a thinning place, a strand caught from the child's sleeve. Cloth is not simply cloth here. It covers food, wraps bread, strains whey, pads a basket, swaddles a tired body, and becomes a bandage if the knife slips. When linen wears thin, it is not thrown away. It descends through uses, from decent covering to kitchen rag, from rag to twist of tinder, from tinder to ash. Erwin's father has been gone long enough that his place is no longer open beside the hearth, but not so long that Una has stopped measuring the evening against him. You know this, by the way. Her hand sometimes goes to the older peg near the wall, the one that once held his belt or hood, before she remembers that Ewan's things hang there now. Widowhood in a cottage does not mean retreat. It means the work changes shape around the person left behind. Una no longer carries peat from the moss, and she does not go as far in bad weather. But the house still turns through what she remembers. Which hen lays poorly, which neighbour returns borrowed iron promptly, which patch of thatch gave trouble after last year's rain, which saint's day should not pass without noticing, which portion to hold back when tomorrow's labour may be heavier than tonight's hunger admits. You bend to lift the first bannock, and a hand comes over yours, not sharply. 2 fingers adjust the angle of your grip so the edge does not tear. The touch is brief. It is correction, but also permission. 3 winters ago, that same hand stopped you more often. It moved your bowls, checked your knot, took the knife from the wrong side of the board, pressed your wrist away from wasted salt. You had felt watched then, and sometimes stung by it. You were a grown woman, not a child. You had brought a strip of cloth from your own mother's house, a comb, your shift, your strength, your knowledge of cattle and kail and bad roads. Yet in this room, belonging had to be learned through repetition. Now your body has begun to answer, before embarrassment comes. You duck under the beam without thinking. You know the place where the floor is colder in frost. You know which bowl leaks if broth is too thin. You know how to draw the child. Back with your knee while keeping both hands full. Una has not softened exactly. Age has not made her sweet in the way tales sometimes make old women sweet, but her watching has changed. More often now, she corrects by trusting you to notice. The younger child has crept closer to Una's stool, drawn by the spindle at her belt. Una slips it free and lets it turn once between her fingers. The wall dips, the shaft spins, and a length of thread tightens from the wool with a faint, dry whisper. The child follows the motion as if it were a charm. It is not a charm. It is another form of food, in a way. Thread becomes cloth. Cloth becomes clothing. Clothing keeps the damp from the skin and the body fit for work. A household without enough cloth is as exposed as a hearth without peat. Una does not make a lesson of it. Her fingers simply do what they have done since girlhood. When some older woman, perhaps her mother or an aunt, once watched her own hands and corrected the twist, that woman is gone. Her name is not spoken tonight, but something of her sits here too, in the way Una draws fibre, in the way you set the hook back where it belongs, in the way the child learns by looking before anyone thinks to call it teaching. Outside, the last light leaves the yard. Inside, the room has gathered around the hearth, not in idleness, but in order. The peats stand stacked by the wall. The pot breathes. The bannock waits its turn. Yuan shifts near the byre partition, making room without needing instruction. Una's stool remains at its old angle, close enough for her to see everything, far enough that younger hands must do the reaching. You feel the shape of the household then, not as a tender thought, but as a practical truth. Una is no longer the strongest back under the roof. She cannot do every task she once did, but the house still contains her in its placements. The hook hangs where she insists it should. The meal is covered. The way she showed you, the child is kept to the safer side. The cloth is folded dry edge outward. The ladle rests where a hand can find it in poor light. When you lift the bowl toward her, you give it first, not because she is helpless, but because age has its place at the board, and because tonight's food has passed through her judgment before it reaches anyone's mouth. She receives it with both hands, her thumbs steady on the rim. For a moment, her face is lit from below by the hearth, and the lines at her eyes seem less like weariness than record. The evening has moved from fuel to knowledge, from what the house burns to what the house remembers. And as you turn back to serve the others, you know that some part of this room is entering your own hands already, ready to be passed on later without ceremony, in the placing of an iron hook, the testing of dough, and the quiet correction of a child who is learning where safety, hunger, work, and love are kept. The youngest child comes to you after the first bowls have been handed out, drawn not by permission, but by the pull of food and habit. She is not yet large enough to claim a place at the board with confidence. So she arrives at the edge of your skirt and leans into the coarse wool as if the cloth itself knows where she belongs. Her hair smells of smoke because every head in the cottage smells of smoke by evening, and because children live low to the hearth, where ash, steam, and wool all mingle in the air they breathe. You do not stop serving. Your hands keep their order, bowl to Yuan, cup set where Una can reach. Bannock turned so the broken side faces inward. But your knee shifts enough to make a shelter for the child, and your elbow angles her away from the hotter stone without making a ceremony of it. In a room this narrow, love often looks like placement, a body moved out of the path of ash, a foot nudged back from a falling spark, a crust saved under the edge of your thumb until the right moment comes. She is at the age when work and play are not fully separate. A twist of wool can become a treasure, then a task, then a thing dropped into rushes and found again by someone older. Near the wall, a little bundle of fleece waits for carding, caught with bits of burr and straw from the sheep's coat. The child's fingers reach toward it, wanting the softness before the labour. You let her hold only the cleaner lock, the part that will not scratch her palm too much. And you watch the way she presses it against her cheek. She will learn later that wool has grease in it, and weather, and animal smell, and the work of many hands before it becomes cloth. For now, she learns that it belongs inside the house, near the women, near the mending, near the patience of the evening. Her wooden cup sits half behind a stool, where it was pushed aside during the rush of supper. It is not finely made. One side is darker from old use, the rim worn by teeth and washing, the grain raised where water has soaked in too often. You hook it with your foot and draw it nearer before bending for it. Because bending with a bowl in one hand and a child at your skirt is a known skill. You rinse the cup with the least splash you can manage. Then fill it only enough. Too much would be spilled. Too little would bring her back again before the others have eaten. A child in a cottage like this is loved, but never set apart from the household's needs. She is watched, warned, fed, carried, corrected, and put to use as soon as her hands can do more good than harm. When you were young in the Western Glen, you learned the same way. No one sat you down to explain the house as if it were a lesson. You found out by being moved from danger, by having a tool taken from you, by being given the safest end of a task. A handful of husks to carry, a thread to wind, a cup to fetch, a hen to shoo back from the kail. Childhood was not emptied of tenderness, but tenderness had work beside it. The girl's bare toes creep too close to the ash line. She likes the fine pale edge where the hearth has been swept. It looks harmless, softer than earth, almost like dust from meal. But under it, a coal can hide its red heart long after the surface seems dull. You turn your ankle and draw her foot back beneath the fold of your skirt. She accepts the movement without surprise. The house has been teaching her boundaries since she could crawl. Not under the pot chain, not near the iron, not behind the cattle's legs, not under Una's stool when the spindle is turning, not at the door when cold air and strangers are coming in. She tilts the cup with both hands and drinks in gulps that are too large for her mouth. A little runs down her chin. You wipe it with the edge of your sleeve, using the part already stained by kail, because cloth is not wasted on what an old cuff can do. Her cheek is warm from the hearthside and cool on the side that has faced the wall. When your fingers pass through her hair, you find a bit of chaff caught there and work it loose. She does not stand still. Children are always leaning, twisting, reaching, folding themselves into adult work until the adults make a shape around them. The crumbs are kept without comment. A broken edge of bannock, a thicker bit from the centre, a place where the oatcake held together better than expected. You set these aside near the bowl, not openly enough to disturb the order of the meal, but not hidden either. Everyone understands such things. The strongest hunger at the board may belong to the men who have carried peat and worked outside. But the child's hunger is watched with a different measure. She is growing. She is careless with food, because she has not yet learned how little separates enough from not enough. You do not scold the carelessness tonight. You place the saved crumbs into her palm and fold her fingers over them so they do not fall. Una's eyes move from the stool, taking in the child, the crumbs, the bare feet, the cup, the ash line. Her authority does not need a raised voice. A glance can still move a room when the room has obeyed that glance for many years. You feel it and adjust the child closer to your side, leaving space for Ewan's knees at the board. The girl chews with her head tipped back against your skirt, and the pull of her weight enters your thigh, then your hip. Then the familiar ache of standing too long. You could set her away. You do not. Near the fleece, she tries again to help. Her damp fingers catch the wool and make it cling. You take the lock from her and give her a shorter twist, already loosened, something she can pull without spoiling too much. The first work children do is often work that must be repaired afterward. That is part of the cost of teaching them. A crooked thread, a spilled cup, a dropped husk, a bowl scraped too hard, a peat crumble scattered over the floor. Adults measure these losses against the future, because one day those hands must know the house when your own are occupied elsewhere. Outside, the last of the light has thinned behind the door cracks. Inside, the child's face is lit from below, much as Una's was moments before, but without the record of years. Smoke has made her lashes damp. Supper has left a shine at the corner of her mouth. One knee is marked with earth. Her sark is rough at the shoulder, where many washings have tightened the thread. You can see the whole path ahead of her in the way she stands there. The first errands, the first real spinning. The first time she is trusted to stir without splashing. The first winter when she understands that a cottage survives, because everyone inside it learns where to place their hands. For now, she is still mostly weight and warmth and wanting. She leans against you as the room settles into eating, and you let your hand rest for one breath on the crown of her smoky hair. It is not a pause anyone would name. The bowl still needs scraping, the cup will need rinsing again. Wool waits near the wall, and the fading light is taking the best of your sight with it. But the child grows under your hand in this crowded room, learning the world through touch. Crumbs, ash, wool, knees, hunger, and the bodies that keep her from harm before she understands the danger. When she finishes the last crumb, she opens her palm to check that nothing remains. You bend her fingers closed again, not because there is more, but because the gesture comforts her. Then you guide her toward the safer corner, close enough to see the board. Far enough from the hearthstone. She goes with the reluctance of a child who wants the center of everything. Her cup is left where you can find it by feel later. And in that movement, from your skirt to the shadowed side of the room, the cottage shows one of its oldest truths. Children are not outside the work of the house. They are carried through it, fed by it, trained by it, and protected from its sharpest edges until they can begin to protect someone else. The wool waits where the child left it, a pale clump near Una's knee, half teased apart and half still holding the shape of the fleece it came from. You draw it back before a bare foot can press it into the floor. There is dirt enough in the house already, without wasting clean fibre on the earth. Little grease clings to your fingers when you lift it. Not unpleasant, just sheep and weather, and the work of many hands before yours. The wool has been washed, but not stripped of itself. It still knows the animal. Una shifts on her stool, and without looking at you, she makes room beside the wall. That is permission enough. The child has been moved to the safer corner. The bowls are nearly done. And the last usefulness of the daylight has thinned to a grey seam at the doorway. This is the hour when hands must choose the work that can still be done by feel. Heavy cutting must wait. Fine picking grows foolish in the dimness. But spinning can continue, and mending too, if the thread is already drawn and the needle is not lost. The distaff rests against the wall peg, where it always rests, wrapped with wool so that it looks almost like a winter branch caught in pale mist. You take it down and settle it under your arm. The spindle hangs from the first length of thread, plain wood, darkened by skin, use and smoke. When your fingers give it a turn, it drops and twists, turning air and wool into something the household can keep. The motion is old before it is yours. Your mother did it in the Western Glen. Una did it here, before Yuan was tall enough to bring peat without dragging half of it in the mud. Girls learn it first by tangling, and then by watching, and then by doing it badly, until their hands stop fighting the fibre. A cottage like this does not have cloth to spare. A torn sleeve is not a reason for new clothing. Worn elbows, thinning knees, rubbed hems, hose patched at the heel, a sark turned and turned again. All of it belongs to the ordinary life of the house. Wool comes from sheep, if the household has them, or from payment, barter, gleaned bits, and careful saving. Linen is dearer in its own way, because flax must be grown, pulled, retted, broken, scutched, hackled, spun, and woven before it can become a shift against the skin. By the time cloth reaches your hand, it carries a year of weather and labour inside it. You do not throw it away because one place has failed. The spindle turns, slows, and is caught before the twist runs wrong. Una's eyes follow the thread. She does not need to take it from you. The angle of her head tells you what her mouth does not. Too loose, and the thread will drift apart when pulled. Too hard, and it will kink back on itself, stubborn as a curled hair. You draw the wool more lightly. The fibres slide from the dressed bundle with a faint, dry whisper, and the grease left in them helps them hold. It is not clean work in the way a modern room would mean clean. It marks the fingers, it scents the skin, but it is clean enough for making. And making is what keeps a household clothed near the board. Eland's hose lie across the bench, one foot darkened at the heel where the weave has gone thin. He will need them again tomorrow, because a man cannot go to the field or the byre with bare legs in wet ground if the weather turns. The patch beside them is not new cloth. It is a saved piece from another worn thing, trimmed into usefulness. You have learned to judge which old garment may be cut and which must be held a little longer. Cloth has ranks inside the cottage. The best linen stays folded for church, for visits, for illness, for birth, for death. The rougher pieces become patches. Smaller scraps become ties, wrappings, strainers, child cloths, padding for a sore place, or the last cleaning of a pot before they finally meet the ash. The needle is kept where a child's hand will not find it and where darkness will not swallow it. You reach to the little place in the wall where Una keeps such things wrapped in a strip of rag. Iron costs. A needle is not a trifle here. It is a narrow tool that can save a sleeve, close a seam, strengthen a rent before it widens. Losing it would mean searching the floor by touch and prayer, worried not only for the cost, but for the foot that might find it first. When it rests between your fingers, it feels nearly weightless, yet the whole evening adjusts around it. You hold the hose close to the last of the light. The child watches from the corner, her head tipped with the solemn attention children give to forbidden things. She is not trusted with the needle, not yet, but she is allowed to watch thread pass in and out, allowed to see that repair is not magic. Only patience repeated, in the right place. You set the patch over the weak heel and begin where the old cloth still has strength. The needle goes down, up, down again. The thread pulls through with a dry drag. You keep the stitches close enough to hold, but not so tight that they bite the fabric into a hard ridge. Una takes up her own spindle. Now there are two turns in the room, yours and hers, not matched, but answering. The child's breathing grows more even. The cattle behind the partition shift once, then settle. The pot gives a low sound as what remains in it thickens against the iron. Outside, the evening has gone further than your eyes can follow. Inside, work continues by memory. This is women's labour. But it is not lesser labour. It is simply easier for men's work to be seen at a distance. A cut peat stack, a mended dike, a cartload brought home, a beast led safely in, these declare themselves. Thread does not. A seam held through winter does not announce the hours that kept it from opening. The value hides close to the body. It is in the shirt that can be worn another year, the plaid that still sheds rain, the hose that reaches morning. the blanket that has not yet thinned beyond use. If the grieve counts grain, hens, and days of service, no one from the laird's hall counts the length of thread drawn after supper. But the house would feel the loss at once if it stopped. Your shoulders know the shape of this hour. One hand lifts and draws, the other steadies. Fingers pinch, release, wind, and begin again. The work is never finished in any final sense. Cloth wears as soon as it is made. Children grow against seams. Men rub through knees and heels. Smoke settles into wool. Rain stiffens hems. Sparks may bite a sleeve. A nail in a doorpost may catch a skirt. Every garment is a promise that must be renewed by someone watching the weak places. You remember your first winter here, when you still reached for things in the wrong places. Erna had let you mend a tear in Ewan's sleeve, and you had made the stitches too large. Proud little bars that would have pulled loose under a day's work. She had taken the cloth back without anger and set her own needle through the old holes, showing you that a repair should not boast of itself. A good patch serves quietly. It lets the person wearing it forget the tear for a while. Now your own hands are quicker. Not perfect. Not Una's. But quicker than they were when you first ducked under this lintel as a wife, bringing what little belonged to you and wondering how long it would take before the room stopped feeling borrowed. Thread has helped with that. So has washing, kneading, stirring, carrying, learning where the shadows fall, learning which peg takes which garment, learning how much cloth can be saved from a sleeve everyone else has given up on. Belonging here has not come in one welcome. It has come in repetitions. The spindle is wound again. You set the mended hose aside where Yuan will find them. By touch if morning is dim. The patch is visible, but neat. It does not pretend the cloth is new. Nothing in the cottage pretends that. The house survives by admitting wear and answering it early. Una glances toward the thread between your fingers, and this time her face does not correct. She watches the twist hold. That is enough. You draw another length from the distaff, and the fibre narrows obediently, pale against the darkening room. For a little while, the night is measured not by bells or candles, but by how much thread can be made before the last light leaves the wall. The thread has thinned enough that you wind it onto the spindle and let your hands fall still. In the dimness, your fingers have begun to know the room better than your eyes do. They know the nick in the bench where the wood splintered last winter, the lip of the meal chest, the peg where Juan's plaid hangs when rain has not soaked it through. They know the place where your own things are kept, though there are not many of them, and though once you would not have known whether you had any right to reach for them without being noticed. Your chest stands against the wall, where the smoke does not settle quite as heavily. It is not large enough to make a boast. 2 hands can lift it when it is empty, though it has not been empty since the day you came here. Its boards are dark from handling, rubbed paler at the front edge, where your thumb finds the same place every time. The iron on it is plain, and the lid does not sit perfectly true. So a draught can carry a thread of ash into the corner if the wind is working under the door. Still, it is yours in the way a married woman's things can be hers in a house ruled by use, age, kinship, and need. You do not open it at once. You listen first, because listening is one of the habits this cottage has taught you. Una shifts on her stool. Yuan is a shape nearer the door, tending to something by touch. The child's breathing has gone loose and heavy against folded cloth. The cattle beyond the partition stir once and settle again. Nothing in the room asks you for your hands in that instant, so you draw the chest a little, nearer with your foot, stopping before the scrape becomes too loud. When the lid lifts, the smell inside is different from the rest of the house. Less peat, less byre, more linen, dried grass, and old wood. The things folded there have been protected from the day's work, but not from the life of the room. A folded sark lies on top, worn at the neck, where skin and washing have thinned it. It was one of the pieces your mother laid with your marriage goods, not fine enough for pride, but sound enough for a woman beginning again under another roof. In the West Glen, she had turned it over in her hands before you left. Testing seam and hem as if cloth could carry advice, better than words, marriage brought you here with no cart piled high, no painted coffer, no line of servants moving goods across a threshold. A woman like you arrived with what her people could spare: linen, perhaps a blanket, a length of homespun, a comb, a knife, maybe a little wool, maybe a bowl, if the household could part with one. In some houses, a written promise or spoken agreement named the tokcha, the marriage portion, but here, memory and witnesses mattered nearly as much as marks on parchment. Your father's household gave what it could without weakening itself. Ewan's household received you, but also received the work your hands would do. That is the plainness beneath the wedding feast, beneath any laughter remembered from that day. Marriage changes where a woman sleeps, whose hearth she tends, whose mother corrects her, whose rent she helps meet, whose children she may bear, whose dead she will one day wash and mourn. It gives her a place, and it takes her from another place. It makes a home, but not by magic. The first nights under this roof, the pegs on the wall seemed to belong to everyone else. Each hook had a history before you reached it. Each pot had a preferred place. Even the shadows looked settled without you. You touch the sark and smooth it without lifting it out. Beneath it lies your belt knife, wrapped in a scrap of cloth to keep the edge from worrying the linen. The knife is not a weapon in the way tales make knives into bright things. It is daily life made narrow and sharp. It trims thread, cuts kail stalks, opens a strip of meat when meat is there, scrapes mud from a shoe, pares a bit of wood, frees a knot when your fingers are too cold to tease it loose. Worn on the belt, it says less about danger than usefulness. A woman without a blade must borrow another person's hand too often. The handle has darkened where your palm holds it. That darkness comforts you more than polish would. It proves that the thing has stayed with you through kitchens, fields, wet mornings, and dim evenings like this one. You remember bringing it from the glen, wrapped among clothes, wondering whether Una would think it too poor or too good, whether Ewan would notice, whether anyone would ask what came with you and what had been left behind. No one needed to ask. A household knows wealth by the thickness of blankets, the number of animals, the sound of meal in a chest, the strength of shoes, the count of workable tools. Beside the knife is the comb. Its teeth are coarse, a few worn shorter than the rest. You use it less for vanity than for order, pulling smoke-tangled hair into scents, loosening burrs, finding what should not be living close to the scalp, preparing yourself for kirk days when the parish sees what each household can keep clean and decent. Cleanliness here is not the shining cleanliness of later houses with glass windows and more water to waste. It is the discipline of washing what can be washed, airing what can be aired, combing hair, shaking cloth, and not letting neglect show if effort can hide it. Your fingers find the strip of cloth from your birth household before you mean them to. It has no strong use left, which is why you have kept it. A narrow piece of dyed wool, faded now. From a sleeve your sister once wore. The colour has dulled until it is more memory than red. You could have used it for a patch. You nearly did once, in the lean weeks before harvest, when every scrap seemed to accuse you if it lay idle. But you folded it back into the chest, not because it is precious in money, because it is the one thing in the box that does not have to earn its keep every day. Even that is not entirely true. It earns a hidden keep. When your hand closes around it, you can feel the house you came from without turning your face toward the door. You remember the colder glen, the steeper path, the way evening gathered earlier between the hills. Your mother's hands rinsing linen in water that bit the skin the roof smell of another house where your place had once been assumed because you were born into its noise. There, no one needed to teach you which peg was yours. There, you knew the floor's moods before you knew what knowing meant. Here, the knowledge came differently. It came by being wrong in harmless ways, then less wrong. You hung a wet cloth where smoke would sour it. You set a bowl too near the feet of a child. You reached for a ladle Una meant to use herself. You folded Yuen's plaid in a way that kept damp in the crease. None of these mistakes ruined anything. They simply showed you that the cottage had rules older than your arrival. A young wife learns them by watching, by being watched, by doing again what she did badly. The first time, the familiar pegs above the chest are no longer just pegs. One holds your outer cloth when you come in from rain. One takes the child's little covering when it must dry without scorching. One is left for Una, because leaving it free is easier than explaining respect. Ilun's place is nearest the door, not because he commands the wall, but because he is often last in from outside and first out again. Your own peg sits between need and permission. At first you used it lightly, as if an older claim might appear and move your things away. Now your hand goes to it, without asking the room. That change has happened so gradually that no one would name it. A married woman's rank in a cottage like this is not announced. It lives in who rises first for the pail, who is trusted with meal, who may correct a child before the grandmother moves, who knows whether the last peat should be broken or saved, who can open the chest without seeming to hide. Una still carries the older authority. Her body knows more winters than yours. Her eyes can weigh a task before your hands have begun it. Yet there are moments now when she lets your decisions stand. A pot moved, a garment mended, a portion saved. A sleeping child covered before anyone else notices. You fold the strip of cloth back beneath the sark. The knife remains where it can be found in the morning. The comb lies toothed down to protect what is left of it. Each thing returns to its place. And with each return, the chest becomes less like a box of goods brought from elsewhere and more like part of the room's breathing order. Your property is limited. Your time is not entirely your own. Your labor belongs to the household almost before it belongs to your body. But inside those limits, there is a narrow country of your keeping. A fold made your way, an edge preserved, a scrap remembered, a garment placed where your hand will find it in the dark. The lid settles with a tired wooden sound. Not loud. Enough for you to know it is closed. You rest your palm on it a moment. Feeling the rough grain under the skin, where the day has left flour, wool grease, water and ash, in fine traces no washing quite removes. The cottage does not welcome by speaking. It accepts by repetition. Night after night. Your hands put things back. Morning after morning, you reach for them again. What belongs to you here is not much when counted like rent or dowry, but it has deepened around you all the same, like a path worn between door, hearth, chest, and bed. The sound at the door is not a knock in the grand sense. No fist pounds the timber. No voice carries through the room. It is the scrape of a foot on the doorstone. Then the pause of someone who knows better than to let the cold in before the household has answered. You lift your palm from the chest. The room seems to listen with you. Ona's head turns first, not sharply, only enough to show that she has marked the sound. Yuan is near the peats, brushing dark crumbs from his fingers. The child by your skirt grows still, because children in houses like this learn early that a threshold is not empty space. It is where news arrives, where need shows itself, where another family's want may become your family's work. You rise without haste and cross the packed floor. The latch is plain under your hand, rubbed smooth where many fingers have found it in dark weather. When the door opens, night presses close at once. Cold air enters low and clean under the smoke, smelling of wet earth, trampled grass, and wool that has been out under a falling mist. On the stone beyond the sill stands your neighbour Alice. her hood drawn close, one hand keeping a covered bowl tucked against her side. Behind her, the yard is no longer a place of shapes. It is more sound than sight. A hen shifting somewhere under the dike, water loosening from thatch. The faint creak of a hurdle. Alice does not step in. She knows the rule without anyone teaching it aloud. In a cottage where floor, fire, food, children, and animals already share too little room, entry is not casual after dark. The doorway holds the exchange. In her other hand, she carries the quern handle your household lent before dusk. The wooden peg that fits into the upper stone and gives the hand something to pull against while grain is ground. It looks ordinary enough, dark at the grip and pale where it has been worn, but a handle like that matters. Without it, the stone can still be turned, but with more strain, more awkwardness, more wasted time. A poor house may own the stone, but lose the ease of using it if one piece splits or goes missing. You take it from her with both hands, partly because it is proper, partly because Una's eyes are on the movement. Borrowed things must come home whole. A tool returned clean tells one story about a neighbour. A tool returned late, cracked, or greasy tells another. And stories cling in a scattered township where people have long memories and few spare goods. Alice has wrapped the end in a rag to keep meal dust from the doorstone. That is not nothing. You notice it. And you know Una notices it too. Courtesy here is not polished speech. It is bringing back the peg before full dark. It is wiping the iron griddle before returning it. It is covering a bowl when crossing the yard. Not only to keep ash and rain out, but to show that what is inside has been tended with respect. The cloth over Alice's bowl is pinned down with 2 fingers. Beneath it, you can smell something faintly sour and green, perhaps a little cooked kail, perhaps whey thickened with meal, perhaps a portion from their pot saved for an old father or a child who has not eaten enough. She has not come to give it away. That much is clear. The bowl belongs to her errand, not to yours. In this world, a covered bowl at the door can mean many things. A favour carried to another house, a measure repaid, a bit of leaven kept alive, a portion guarded from hungry hands until it reaches the right person. Ewan shifts behind you but leaves the answering to the women at the door. That too belongs to the shape of the evening. Men may settle rents, cut peat, lead cattle, stand before the grieve when dues are counted, but the traffic of bowls, borrowed girdles, needles, milk, salt, and remedies often passes through women's hands. Alice knows which house has a spare spindle whorl, who has a child coughing, whose cow has held her milk, whose oats have ground too coarse, whose daughter is near marriageable age, and being watched by more eyes than she knows. No one lingers over the news. Night is too cold for it, and the open door eats fuel. Still, the message comes in through gesture. Alice tilts her head toward the track that leads down to the laird's land, that then lowers her eyes to the quern handle in your hand. You understand enough. Movement at the hall, a cart seen late, men going in and out. Perhaps the grieve has been counting what is due from the holdings before the week is out. Perhaps a servant from the hall has been asking which households still owe hens, or whose barley was poor, or who can spare a day when the laird's work calls. Far-off kings do not need to be named for the pressure to reach this threshold. In the later 15th century, Scotland is ruled through layered nearness. The king is real, prayed for and feared in law, but he is not the man whose boots stand in your yard. The laird's officer is nearer, the tally is nearer, the field strip, the rent hen, the measure of grain, the day of labour owed from Ewan's back are nearer still. News travels through halls and kirks and tracks, but by the time it reaches your door, it has become practical. What must be kept aside? Who must rise earlier? What can no longer be eaten tonight? You step back just enough to take the cold from Alice's face without inviting a full visit. The room behind you is visible to her in fragments. Peat glow, hanging pot, Una's figure near the hearth, the child's hair catching light. The chest closed again. She will read what she can. Every cottage reads another cottage when the door opens. A bowl too empty, a pot too thin, too much smoke, a tool missing, a child without enough covering, a husband at home or away, an older woman still strong or beginning to fail. Nothing needs to be said for reputation to gather its threads. You reach toward the peg near the door where the iron griddle hangs. Its round face is dark from years over flame, the edge nicked, the handle socket worn. Earlier, Alice had asked for the quern piece, not the griddle, but you know why your hand moves there. The day before, her own iron plate had warped at the edge. Bannocks scorch when the metal does not sit right. Meal wasted on a bad baking is not a trifle. A household can be judged by its bread, but bread depends on tools, fuel, hands, grain, and weather before it ever reaches a mouth. Una watches. She does not forbid you. That is permission enough, though not generous permission, not careless permission. You do not unhook the griddle fully. You only touch it and glance back, letting the matter pass through the room before it passes out of the house. Ilun's mother gives the smallest lowering of her chin. The griddle may go tomorrow. Not tonight, it will return before supper. It must not be kept overlong. Alice understands. Her fingers tighten once on the covered bowl. In answer, the cold is beginning to find the child's ankles. You feel it too, along the hem of your kirtle. A thin bite after the smoke-filled room. You shift your body to narrow the opening. Such movements are part of neighbourliness as much as lending is. You do not shame Alice by making her hurry, but you do not hold the doorway wide, as if fuel costs nothing. In a place like this, kindness has to know the weight of peat. Alice sets her free hand briefly against the doorpost, not quite touching the inside. And you see the wet on her sleeve. She is crossed from a house much like yours, low-roofed, busy, breathing smoke and animal heat, holding its own worries under thatch. Her people may need the griddle. Yours may need her help before the next moon is out. A woman in childbed, a cow calving badly, a strip of cloth to be cut for binding, an extra pair of hands at harvest, a warning about an officer on the road. None of these can be managed by pride alone. You place the quern handle on the inner ledge where Una can inspect it when the door is closed. Then you take from near the hearth a heel of bannock wrapped in a scrap of linen. Not much, not enough to make a gift grand, only enough to make the return of the tool feel met with decency. It is yesterday's edge, dry but clean. You do not press it into Alice's bowl. You set it on top of the cloth, where she may accept it without display and carry it on for a breath. The two of you share the threshold, one inside, one outside, both knowing that neither position is fixed forever. Tomorrow you may be the one at her door, asking for a comb of wool, a handful of dried herbs, a borrowed pot hook, or news from the track. Rural life rests on these crossings. Scarcity does not make people solitary. It makes them observant. It teaches them when to lend, when to remember, when to refuse without cruelty, and when to help, because a household that never helps will one day find no door opening to it. Alice dips her head and turns back into the night. The bowl remains covered under her hand. The bannock rides above it, pale in the dusk for a moment before her body takes it into shadow. You watch only long enough to be sure her foot finds the first worn stone beyond the threshold. Then you draw the door inward. The latch settles. The room closes around. You again. Altered by almost nothing, and yet not quite the same. The air that entered is already thinning near the hearth. The child leans back against your skirt. Yuan returns to the peats. Una reaches for the quern handle, weighs it in her hand, and sets it where it belongs. No speech is needed. The house has lent, received, measured, and remembered. Outside, another bowl moves through the dark toward another low doorway. Inside, you lower your hands and feel the night resume its place around the fire. The door has hardly settled before the memory of another doorway comes back to you. Not Alice in the dusk, not a neighbour with a covered bowl, but the grieve from the laird's hall standing there in daylight, with mud drying on his boots. He had come near the end of the afternoon, when the hens were loud along the wall, and the yard still held the wet shine of morning rain. You had been rinsing a wooden bowl with water that was already too grey for anything but the last use. Yuan had seen the man first. His back changed before his face did. He straightened, wiped his hands on the side of his tunic, and set himself beside the doorway as if the low lintel belonged to him and must not make him look bent. The grieve was not a lord. That mattered, and did not matter. He was the man who came from the laird's hall, with the power to count what smaller households owed. Behind him stood the authority of land, rent, harvest, and memory. A Stuart king might sit far away, in a castle or burg you would never see, with clerks, seals, lords, and churchmen moving around him. But in your cottage, the kingdom often arrived as one man, with damp leather at his feet, a rough tally in his hand, and eyes trained to notice whether a household was keeping back more than it should. You remember the mud most clearly. It had clung in a hard ridge around the soles of his boots, dark and yellow-brown, from the track beyond the fold. When he shifted his weight, a crumb of it broke loose onto your threshold. You had noticed it because you were watching the ground, not his face. A woman who is married into a house learns where her eyes may rest when an outsider is present. Too bold a stare looks like challenge. Too much hiding looks like fear. So you look at boots, hands, tools, the edge of a cloak, the place where rain has dried darker on wool. Erna had stayed near the hearth, but she had not made herself invisible. She kept one hand on the meal chest, not guarding it exactly, only resting there as if the chest were part of her body. The child had been drawn away from the ash. The hens outside clucked and fussed, foolishly busy, unaware that one of their number might be written into a debt. The grieve had marked the household in the plain units by which power becomes ordinary. A bearer or oats after harvest. A hen when hens are due. A day of work when the laird's land needs hands. A carrying duty if something must be brought from one place to another. Sometimes money when coin can be found, though coin passes through a cottage like water through fingers. More often it is food, labour, wool, animals, and time. Time is one of the hardest things to owe, because it must be taken from your own field. Your own pot, your own mending, your own sleeping body. Near the fire now, you draw your fingers along your skirt and feel a faint roughness where the cloth caught on the doorpost earlier. The room has returned to itself after Alice. Yet the thought of the grieve makes each familiar thing seem countable again. The peats near the wall are not only peats. They are hours cut from the moss, dried when weather allowed, carried before rain spoiled them. The meal under the cloth is not only supper, it is seed, rent, hunger, habit, and mourning. Even the hen, scratching under the dike, becomes less comic when you remember that a bird can be food for a child or a mark against a household's name. Yuan crouches to move the peat with the iron, and the posture reminds you of how he stood that day. He had not argued. Men in cottages do not waste defiance on a man who can carry their name back to the hall. Instead, he had answered with his body, shoulders square, hands visible, the door open enough to show there was no shame inside. Not so wide that the room felt offered for inspection. He has always been better at stillness than you. When you first came from the western glen, you mistook that stillness for coldness. Now you know, it is often his way of holding the roof up without showing the strain. The laird himself is not cruel in every story told of him, and that is part of the truth too. A household can owe rent to a man who is not a monster. It can depend on his mill, his protection, his court, his rights over the land, and still feel the weight of him every time grain is measured. In much of late medieval Scotland, small tenants and cotters live inside these layered obligations. The king's peace, the lord's rights, the parish's needs, the weather's mercy, and a family's hunger all meet in places as plain as your doorway. The grieve had brought news as well as counting. Roads had been poor beyond the burn. Men from another holding had been told to be ready if a summons came. Not war in the great storybook sense, not banners filling the sky outside your cottage, but the practical kind of warning that changes how a household plans. A man may be called for service, a cart may be needed, a road may become crowded with riders, messengers, or men who expect lodging, fodder, or news. The Stuart king's quarrels and claims may be spoken of in halls, but here they turn into a question of whether Ewan must leave work undone tomorrow, whether extra meal can be spared, whether the older boy at the next holding will be sent in his father's place. You had heard only pieces while keeping your hands busy. That is how much news reaches women in a cottage, through thresholds, through men's faces after visitors leave, through the way an older woman stops working for half a breath, through which tasks are done first the following morning. No one needs to explain that a summons matters. You know because the work of a man's absence falls into the room before the man has gone anywhere. Now the night has thickened enough that walls seem closer. Una sets the quern handle aside, and the sound is plain against the packed earth. Yuan looks toward the meal chest, then to the door, as if measuring daylight that is no longer there. Tomorrow must be shaped before sleep is allowed to take it. The hen that wanders near the wall must be found at first light. The oats must be checked again. If the grieve returns, the house must have its answer ready in grain, bird, labour, or a promise that can be believed. You move the covered bowl Alice brought farther from the edge of the board. It is one less worry for tonight, and perhaps one more obligation for another day. That is how the whole countryside seems to breathe around you. One house lending, one house owing, one hall counting, one king distant, beyond hills and roads, and every cottage trying to keep enough inside its walls to meet the morning without shame. For now, there is still supper to finish. The pot needs stirring. The child needs settling away from the ash. The low board must be cleared enough for bowls. Politics, when it reaches you, does not arrive as a speech or a seal. It arrives as mud on a threshold, a hen remembered by number, Yuan standing straighter than he feels, and your own hands deciding how much meal can be taken from the chest before tomorrow begins. The low board comes forward only when the room is ready for it. Until then, it leans where it has leaned all day, out of the way of feet, pails, wool, and the restless path between hearth and byre. You clear a place with the side of your hand, pushing stray husks and threads toward the floor. Then set the board down near the hearthstone where the light is strongest and the ground is most even. Una notices the tilt before you do. One corner rocks against the packed earth, so she reaches for a chip of wood kept for just that purpose, and the board settles under her fingers. Nothing grand has happened, yet the whole cottage changes. Work becomes supper, the room that held worry, animals, smoke, grain, neighbourly debt, and tomorrow's reckonings narrows itself around food. The bowls are not all alike. One is older and darker at the rim, worn where many mouths have met it. Another has a hairline split that no longer leaks if it is kept away from the thinnest broth. The horn spoons lie together, dulled by use, their edges shaped by years of scraping oats from wood. You set them down in the order your hands know. First where Una will sit, then Yuan, then yourself, within reach of the child. Then the place where the younger ones wait, without needing to be told. No one in a house like this has a chair of rank, yet rank is everywhere. It sits in who is served first, who may reach without asking, who breaks the bannock, who takes the thinnest part as if it were ordinary preference. Age has weight, men's outdoor labour has weight. The older woman's memory has weight. Your own work has weight too. though it often shows itself by being the last hand to take from the pot. You lift the lid, and the steam comes up with the smell of kail, meal, and the trace of salt that must never be wasted. The pot has thickened well enough. That is a relief you feel in your shoulders before you name it. A thin supper can be stretched with silence, with smaller mouthfuls, with water in the cup, with a mother's fingers pretending not to count. A thicker one lets everyone settle a little deeper into the room. The ladle moves through the pottage with a heavy pull. You fill Una's bowl first because the house does, even when no one says so. She is past the hardest field work now, but she carries the old shape of the place. She knows how much meal was in the chest before your marriage brought your own linen, comb, and hands under this roof. She knows which winter took the most peat, which cow calved badly, which rent was paid in grain, and which in days of labour. Setting her bowl first is not ceremony, it is memory made visible. Ewan's portion comes next. He has brought in the peats, measured the weather at the door, listened for what the grieve's return may require, and held himself straighter than his tired back wanted. You give him enough that the bowl looks honest. Then use the spoon to guide a thicker bit toward the side nearest him. Not much. Nothing that would shame the others by being seen as favour. Just a little more of what will sit longer in the belly. The best portion is moved almost, without looking. A shred of greens that held close to the pot's side. A denser spoonful of meal, a piece less watery than the rest. In wealthier halls, the best pieces travel by rule, by dais, by trencher, by who sits above the salt and who below. Here the rule is smaller and nearer. It passes through your wrist, through Una's glance, through Ewan's lowered bowl, through the child who waits, because waiting is one of the first lessons a cottage teaches. The bannocks are broken, not cut. Oat bread from the girdle has a rough edge and a dry, pleasant smell, and when you tear it apart, the crumbs fall onto the board where they can be gathered later. Nothing edible is merely lost. A crumb may be pressed into pottage, a hardened piece may quiet a child, a scrap may go toward the hen if it cannot serve a person. Scarcity does not always announce itself as hunger. Often it is the habit of seeing every fragment. You. Place a piece near Una, another near Ewan, smaller pieces for the children, and one for yourself that is plain at the edge. The child closest to your skirt watches the bread more than the bowl. You know the look. It is not greed. It is the body learning how food appears, how it is divided, how love can be hidden inside the size of a broken piece. You nudge one crumb closer with the back of your finger, and the child's hand waits another breath before taking it. The shared cup moves after the first mouthfuls. It may hold thin ale, whey, or water, depending on what the house has to spare. And tonight it is passed with the same order as the bowls. The rim is wiped with the thumb, turned, offered, received. In a larger household, vessels might show status. Silver for the high table, pewter for the better sort, wood and horn below. Here, the cup is common, and still it has its rules. A child does not drain it. A working man does not empty it before the older woman has had her turn. You take enough to wet your mouth, and no more eating begins with sounds more than words. Spoon against bowl, breath cooling a mouthful, a bench leg shifting against earth. The faint, wet movement of cattle beyond the partition. The buyer seems to listen with the rest of you. The animals have had their place in the evening, but their value sits at supper too. Milk, dung, hide, traction, warmth, and worry all stand behind that timber screen. A cow can be worth more than any pot on the board. A hen can matter enough to trouble a whole night's planning. The younger ones eat with the intensity of those who have spent the day near food, but not free with it. They know not to reach across Una. They know not to scrape too soon. They know the bowl is not finished until the one who filled it has judged what remains. Childhood here is not separate from household order. It grows inside it. learning by placement, portion, touch, and the pauses adults make around want. You keep your own bowl near the pot because your work is not done when supper begins. If the child leans too near the ash, your knee turns him back. If Edwin's bannock breaks into the dirt, your fingers lift the clean part before anyone makes much of it. If Una's spoon pauses, you notice whether it is weariness, thought, or a bit of grit in the meal. The meal feeds you, but it also keeps you attending to everyone else. Still, there is pleasure in it. Not feast pleasure. Not the full-bellied ease of a lord's table with meat carved in view and servants carrying dishes away. This is nearer and more private. The first thick mouthful, after standing too long, the sour green of kail softened by grain, the oat bread catching at the broth. Aye, the shared cup, cool after smoke, your hands have worked toward this since the pail came over the threshold. Now the room accepts it. Outside, the dark presses against the door. Inside, the board holds what the household can offer itself tonight. Not abundance, but order, not leisure, but a pause shaped by custom. Every person has a place close enough to touch another's sleeve. Every portion has been judged without a word. The grieve may come tomorrow. The hen may still need finding. The meal chest may look too plain by morning light. But for these few minutes, the cottage has answered the night in the way it knows best. You draw your spoon through the bowl and feel the warmth of it settle below your ribs. Around the low board, the family bends over the same food, each person held by age, work, need, and belonging. No written rule hangs on the wall, no steward stands over the board. Yet the order is real, carried in hands that pass bread, in children who wait, in Una's place nearest the old habit of the house, in Ewan's portion, made strong enough for tomorrow, and in your own bowl, taken last, while the pot still gives off its fading steam. The room loses its edges while you eat. At first, there is enough glow from the hearth for every face to be known without effort. Una's cheek hollowed by age, Ewan's brow lowered over his bowl. The children close enough to catch dropped crumbs before they are trodden into the floor. Then the last of the day drains from the doorway cracks and the smoke hole above, and the wall beyond the bench becomes less a wall than a darker kind of air. No one rises to mend it with light. Not yet. A rushlight waits where Una has set it aside, a thin thing of peeled rush dipped in saved fat, useful and not to be wasted. A candle would be finer, but wax belongs to kirk altars and better tables, and even tallow must be earned from an animal that gave more than light. In a house like this, darkness is not treated as an enemy at once. It is allowed to come part way in. So long as hands can still find bowl, spoon, cup, bread, child, you know the order of the meal now by touch as much as sight. The rim of your bowl is rough in one place. The horn spoon has a worn place where your thumb fits. When the shared cup reaches you again, you can feel from its weight that there is little left in it, and that is enough. The children slow before the grown folk do. Not because hunger has ended, but because the pot has told the truth. Supper is not finished when appetite is gone. Supper is finished when the household has judged what can be spared. Yuan scrapes the inside of the pot with the wooden ladle, and the sound is almost tidy, a dull stroke against iron. What clings to the curve is not thrown away. It is loosened with the last thin warmth of broth and shared by habit, because the bottom of a pot can feed a mouth if the woman tending it has watched closely enough. A strip of oat bread cleans a bowl. A fingertip catches a bit of softened kail from the board. The house does not call this hunger. It calls it sense. Smoke gathers above eye level, where the rafters have been blackened year after year. It is thicker near the roof and kinder near the floor, which is one reason the children crouch easily and the older bodies fold themselves around the low board without complaint. Your eyes sting when the draught turns wrong, but the smoke has its uses. It keeps insects from the thatch, dries what hangs near the heat, and marks the roof with the long memory of cooking. The cottage smells of peat, kail, damp wool, and eaten grain. By morning, it will smell of all these things again. As the meal thins, so does speech, though no spoken lines are needed to make meaning plain. Una's hand moves once toward the younger child's bowl, checking without looking whether anything has been left. Yuan shifts his knee to make room for the eldest to lean nearer the center. You tilt your own bowl toward the hearth glow and see the broth run clear along the bottom. There is comfort in knowing the measure exactly. Nothing has been hidden from you by bright light or plenty. The evening is plain, and because it is plain, it can be managed. Outside, if anyone passed the cottage now, they would see little. Perhaps a low red breath under the door. Perhaps a blur where the smoke lifts and mixes with the last weather of the lane. Inside, the family is still gathered, but the room is changing its purpose. The board that held supper will soon hold rinsed bowls. The stool near Una's knee will become a place for folded work. The hearth will no longer be asked to boil, only to keep its heart alive under ash. You rinse the first bowl with a mouthful of water saved in the wooden vessel, turning it so the grit loosens and runs to one side. There is no thought of filling a basin freely. Water has weight. It came from outside in the pail, against your fingers, in the hour when the yard was already losing colour. A little must do what more would do in a richer house. The bowl is wiped with a twist of cloth and set where it will dry in the hearth's reach. Another follows, then another. The children watch the rushlight as if waiting for permission from it. Its pale stem rests unlit, held back for the tasks that truly need it. A needle's eye, a child's face before sleep, the last turn of wool, the checking of a latch or tether when the fire has sunk too low to help. Light has a rank in the cottage. Just as people do, firelight is common, shared by all. Daylight is taken when it comes. Rushlight is kept for purpose. Candlelight, if it comes at all, belongs to moments that must be remembered. By now, the far side of the room has nearly disappeared. The pegs on the wall are shapes only because you already know what hangs from them. Ewan's outer plaid, the twist of rope, the spare wooden cup, a bag that should not be knocked down in the dark. The meal chest crouches in shadow. And though you cannot see the cloth over the grain, you feel its presence as surely as if your hand rested on the lid. Tomorrow's reckoning has not gone away. It has merely settled into the room with the rest of the night. Una gathers herself slowly from her place. Age makes rising a task, but authority does not need speed. Her glance takes in the pot, the bowls, the children, the hearth, and you understand which duties remain, because you have lived beside that glance for 3 winters. You have learned not only the work, but the timing of the work. Too soon, and fuel is wasted. Too late, and the dark makes every movement clumsy. A household is kept by knowing the narrow path between the last bowl is cleaned. The ladle is laid where it will be found before dawn. The low board, emptied of food, shows crumbs and damp places in the fading glow. You brush the crumbs into your palm and keep them from the floor. Even that much may belong to morning, to a child, to the hens if the missing one comes back to the dike. Waste is not a dramatic sin here. It is a leak, enough leaks, and winter finds them. For a while, nobody moves far. The meal has drawn the household inward, and the dark keeps it there. You feel the heaviness in your hands now that the spoon is no longer in them. Your back remembers bending over the pot. Your mouth holds salt, smoke, and oat. The room has narrowed to breathing, the dull red at the hearth, the cattle shifting beyond the partition, and the little sounds of bowls settling into place. Only then does Una reach for the rushlight, not to brighten the house, not to push night away, but to lend a thin line of flame to what must come next. The rushlight steadies, and the room seems to draw a breath around it. Una shields the flame with one bent hand, while the other searches beside her stool, not blindly, because her fingers know the place. From a crack between the wall peg and the meal chest she takes the little cord of beads, dark with handling and smoke. Too plain to be a treasure, and too familiar to be treated as nothing. They are not jewels, they are a count for memory, a way for tired hands to keep their place when the mind is full of bowls, weather, cattle, and what may be owed at morning. You wipe the last damp from your fingers on your apron and lower yourself near the hearthstone. The ash gives off no bright heat now, only a buried redness and the dry smell of peat that has burned down through the evening. Yuan settles on the other side of the low board. The children, who had been shifting and nudging each other in the dimness, begin to grow still because the grown bodies around them have changed. No one needs to make a great ceremony of it. In a house like this, faith enters as work enters, through repeated movements learned before anyone remembers learning them. Una passes the beads through her fingers once, not for show. The cord is patched where it has frayed, and one bead is not like the others, replaced perhaps from another string long ago. A better household might have a carved image, a painted panel, a little book for those who can read it well. Here there is the cord, a cross scratched on a bit of wood near the wall, and the shape made by hands folded over one another. That is enough for tonight. Enough does much of the labour in this cottage. You cross your hands at your breast and bow your head. The rushlight makes the knuckles of your own fingers look older than you feel, with flour caught at one crease and a thin line of soot along the side of your thumb. Your hands have kneaded, lifted, rinsed, soothed, stood, and counted, and held back a child from the ash. Now they do the other work. They know, they become still. The parish kirk is not in the room, yet it seems closer in this moment. By day it stands beyond the fields and track. Stone and timber gathered around its yard, where the dead of the parish lie near the living path. On Sundays and saints' days, when weather and duties allow, the household goes there with others from scattered cottages and farm towns. The priest's Latin may pass above many heads like wind in branches, but the bending, crossing, waiting, and watching are understood. The body learns the faith even when every word does not belong to the tongue of the house. You remember the bell from earlier in the year, carried across damp ground on a clearer evening. Thinner than a cattle call and stranger than birdsong. It marked time differently from hunger or weather. Saints' days do that too. They set names into the turning of the year, days when certain work is paused if it can be, when a kirk path fills, when a child is reminded of a holy name, when a woman notices how old a garment has grown because she wore it last at the same feast. The calendar hangs nowhere on your wall, but it lives in habits, fasts, fairs, church-going, and in what Una remembers before anyone else does. The prayers tonight are not grand. They belong to the size of the room. They gather Yuan's work outside. Your work inside, Una's aging bones, the children sleeping under this roof, the cattle beyond the partition, the hen that may or may not come back from the dike, the seed in the ground, the meal in the chest, and kin beyond sight. Medieval faith is often spoken of through abbeys, bishops, relics, kings, and lands given to God, but here it is held close to the hearth, where a family asks that bodies, beasts, and food endure one more night, and then another. The child nearest you leans against your skirt. You feel the weight before you look down. A head, heavy with sleep, presses into the worn wool at your knee. Smoke has settled in the child's hair, and underneath it there is the milky, earthy smell of a small body kept near the fire all evening. You let one hand loosen from its cross place just long enough to rest over the child's shoulder. It is not a break in prayer, it is part of it. Una's thumb moves along the beads. The tiny sound is almost nothing, a dry touch of wood against skin, but in the dim room it becomes the measure of the next few breaths. Each bead makes space for a name, a plea, a remembered absence, a debt of thanks. Perhaps she thinks of her husband, gone long enough that his place has become memory rather than a daily shock. Perhaps she thinks of the old cattle disease that once moved through nearby holdings, or of a birth that frightened the women of the house, or of the winter when the peat ran low before Candlemas. You do not need to know. Prayer lets some things remain private, even where privacy is scarce. The cattle shift behind the partition, and the tether gives a muted pull against wood. The sound folds easily into the room. No one smiles at it, yet no one ignores it either. A cow is not only an animal here. She is milk, manure for the field, warmth through the wall, standing wealth, and a risk that breathes. A prayer for livestock is not quaint. It is practical hope. If a beast weakens, the whole household feels it in food, rent, and fear of the next season. Yuan bows his head lower. In the rushlight, his shoulders seem larger than they did at supper, dark against the wall, marked by the day's lifting and the cold he carried in with the peats. You know the set of those shoulders when the grieve is expected, when a neighbour brings news, when weather turns against cut fuel, when a tool breaks and cannot be replaced easily. Men may carry some anxieties differently from women, but the house gathers them all in the same air at night. Rent, harvest, birth, illness, old age, and mercy do not stay in separate corners. You think, briefly, of the glen where you were born. Farther west, where another hearth may now be banked, and another woman may be counting what remains. Marriage brought you here by path, by agreement, by family need, and by the ordinary force that moves daughters from one set of walls into another. You have become known in this cottage by doing what needed to be done until your movements fit its shape. Yet, in prayer, the distance loosens. Your mother, your birthkin, the dead whose faces come less sharply now, and the living who may be hungry or well tonight all enter without taking room. The rushlight trembles when wind presses somewhere along the wall. Its flame leans and then rights itself. Shadows shift over the rafters, over the pot chain, over the folded plaids, over the emptied bowls. The cottage is poor in many of the things a richer house would count, but not empty of order. There is a proper time to light, a proper time to eat, a proper time to bank the fire, and a proper time to place the household under God's keeping before sleep makes everyone helpless. At last, Una lets the beads rest in her lap. The children remain still for a moment longer, as if the room itself has not yet released them. Ash settles inward at the hearth. Outside, the night has thickened over the yard, the byre wall, the kail patch, and the path that leads eventually to the kirk. Inside, no miracle has changed the meal chest, the weather, the rent, or the work waiting at first light. But the room has changed in the way a tired body changes after a hand is laid gently on it. What cannot be solved has been named without noise. What must be carried has been shared, if only for these few breaths near the hearthstone. The first sign is not rain, but Una's head lifting toward the roof. Nothing in the room has broken. No one startles. The children are still folded into the hush that follows prayer. And Yuan remains near the wall, with his hands resting on his knees. Yet the sound above you changes. The night wind comes over the cottage in a long drag, pulling at the thatch as fingers might worry loose wool. Somewhere high in the dark, straw answers with a dry shiver. Then the whole roof settles again, not heavily, not in danger, but with the familiar complaint of a house doing its work. You know the sound well enough now to separate one thing from another. Wind at the door is a low push. Wind at the smoke hole is a restless sucking. Drawing the last thread of peat smoke upward and then pressing it back into the rafters. Wind in good thatch passes over and goes on. Wind in a weak place lingers. That is what makes your shoulders tighten now. Not fear. Exactly. Listening. Yuan turns his face upward too. In a cottage like this, a roof is not a single finished thing. It is a living bargain with weather, reeds, straw, heather, turf, rods, and weight all have their place, depending on what the land gives and what hands can gather. A richer roof may be better laid and thicker. A poorer one asks more watching. Your own roof has been patched in seasons, one part dark with old smoke, one part newer where last autumn's storms lifted a strip near the byre end, one part pressed down by turf where the wind comes hardest from the west. The next sound is water, not a stream of it, not even a drop falling to the floor. Only a faint tick near the wall, so light that a sleeping child would miss it. Una does not miss it, neither do you. After supper, after prayer, after the careful naming of worry before God, the house gives you a different kind of reckoning. If water finds a path tonight, it may wet the bedding. It may soften a place in the wall head. It may drip onto stored wool or into the meal if no one sees it in time. You shift the rushlight just enough for its thin flame to lean across the room. The light reaches the wall in a narrow wash and finds the place where turf meets roof. Earth walling holds cold and damp differently from timber or stone. It can shelter well when kept sound, but it must be mended like clothing. Rain scours, frost opens. Smoke dries one place and leaves another clammy. The cottage is not frail because people are careless. It needs care because every season handles it. Yuan is already reaching for the bundle kept near the byre partition, where dry straw and reed ends are saved for such moments. Nothing useful is thrown away unless it has truly lost use. A woman may save a length of thread. A man may save a strip of wattle. Una saves the knowledge of which corner fails first. You take the shallow wooden bowl from its peg and set it beneath the sound. Though no drop has yet shown itself, the gesture is partly practical and partly a way of marking the place. In the half-dark, the room remembers by objects. A stronger push of wind passes over. The thatch rasps, then presses down with its own weight. From the byre side, a cow shifts, and the tether gives a faint scrape. The animal has heard the weather too, but her world is simpler. Roof, bedding, breath, the nearness of bodies. For the household, the meaning is wider. Thatch must be thick enough to turn rain, shaped enough to shed it, weighted enough to stay, yet open enough above the hearth to let smoke escape. Shelter and smoke fight each other in the same roof. Too tight, and the room chokes. Too loose, and the weather enters. Yuan climbs only as far as the low bench allows, bracing one hand against a rafter blackened by years of peat. He does not pull at the roof from below. That would do harm. Instead, he presses a twist of dry straw upward into the place where the sound has sharpened, easing it with the kind of patience learned outdoors. You hold the rushlight lower so the flame will not lick too near the dry ends. Its smell changes as it gutters, hot pith and faint grease. Then steadies. Una watches the motion with the calm of someone who has seen roofs fail in worse weather and hold in worse weather too. Her eyes move from Yuan's hands to the wall, from the wall to the bowl, from the bowl to the sleeping place. In her watching there is a whole history of this house. The winters before you came, the years when Yuan was a boy, are the times when a storm meant rising before dawn, to press sods back into place before rain spoiled, the inside work of a week. You remember your first winter here, when every noise above seemed like a warning. In the glen where you were born, the wind had a different path, running down between slopes with a sharper note. Here it comes more broadly, crossing field and yard before it shoulders the cottage. 3 years have taught your body the local language of weather. You know when to pull a plaid closer around a child, when to move a bowl, when to leave a sound alone because a house must move a little, if it is to last. The tick comes again. This time a bead appears, darkening the packed earth where the bowl has not quite caught it. You slide the bowl with 2 fingers. The next drop lands inside, with a sound hardly larger than breath. It is not enough to trouble the night if it stays there. It is enough to be remembered in the morning. A roof is repaired in daylight, if daylight allows. Someone will look from outside, test the lifted place, press in more thatch, perhaps lay a heavier strip of turf over the weather side. It will take time from other work, because a cottage never gives a task without taking the time from somewhere else. The wind passes again, but the note has changed. The worrying sound is duller now. Yuan lowers himself from the bench and brushes straw dust from his sleeve. No one makes a ceremony of success. The house has not been rescued. It has only been answered. That is much of rural life. A sound comes, a hand goes to it. A patch holds until morning. For a while, all of you listen. The bowl receives one more drop, then none. Smoke trails upward in a wavering line, uncertain whether to leave or stay. The rafters creak once, as if turning in sleep. Beyond them, the thatch takes the weather in its layered back, straw against wind, turf against lifting, smoke-dark reeds against the cold sky. Beneath it, the room gathers itself again, children near the hearth, Una with the beads resting idle, Yuan's hands marked with straw, your own fingers smelling of wood and damp earth. The prayer has ended, but its shape remains. The cottage asks for faith of another sort now, not in miracles, but in ordinary mending. You trust the roof, because hands have made it, watched it, patched it, cursed it under breath, blessed it in storms, and climbed to it again when the weather found a weak seam. It is not a perfect shelter, it is the shelter you have. At last, Una's gaze drops from the rafters. The room releases its held breath by degrees. The children begin to move, again. One heel drawing back under a plaid, one head turning towards sleep. Outside, the wind still travels over field, dike, kail yard, byre wall, and path. Inside, the bowl waits under the patched place, empty enough for hope, ready enough for prudence. You draw the pail nearer with your foot, not because there is much water left, but because the habit of saving it has settled deeper than thought. The bowl under the patched place stays where it is for now, empty enough to watch, and the other wooden bowl comes into your lap with the dull knock of worn staves. Its inside is smooth from years of hands, its rim darkened where fingers have held it after work, after meals, after weather. The water is cold. It has lost whatever kindness the room might have given it. When your fingers enter, they tighten at once, and for a breath you feel every nick made by straw, peat, wool, and iron. You do not wash as a modern person might imagine washing, with water running freely and soap for every use. Water has been carried in. It has weight. It has taken time from the well or burn. Time in which the sky darkened and the ground pulled at your shoes. By this hour, each dip must answer for itself. You wet your hands first, not deeply, just enough. You rub the heel of one palm into the other, working at the dark line where peat dust has lodged near the nail. Ash clings differently from earth. Meal comes away in a pale cloud. The smell that rises from your skin is not filth exactly, but the plain record of the evening. Smoke, oat, damp straw, wool grease, oniony green from the kail, and the sour trace of the byre air carried back under the roof. Cleanliness here is not a shining state. It is a comfort made in portions. Una shifts on her stool, and you feel her attention without looking up. She has lived long enough to know what can be spared and what cannot. A household like this does not waste water to prove virtue. It washes what matters before sleep. Hands that will touch faces, cuffs that will sour if left wet with food, a child's mouth, a bowl that must not greet morning with old grease in its grain. The rest is borne on clothing until there is light, weather, and reason to deal with it. Your linen cuffs are next. The cloth at your wrist has gone stiff where supper and smoke have met. You pinch it between finger and thumb, dip only the edge, and press it against itself. Linen is dearer than the outer wool, and it takes the body's closeness more directly. It is the layer that catches sweat, skin, milk, flour, and breath. You own little enough of it to be tender with it. A torn cuff means stitching by poor light. A foul one means sleeping with the day too near your face. Across the hearth, one of the children has begun to fade sideways into a plaid, but the face still needs tending. You draw the child closer with the bend of your arm, not making an event of it. The child leans because tiredness has made obedience easier. With 2 damp fingers, you soften the line of soot near the cheekbone and clear the shine beneath the nose. The skin is warmer than the water. The mouth turns away at the cold, then settles. Smoke has laid itself in the child's hair, the way it has laid itself in yours, not as a passing smell, but as part of the house's own weather. There is no privacy in this. The washing happens where supper happened, where prayer happened, where the roof was watched, where the animals breathe behind the timber screen. Yet there is a kind of modesty in the way everyone looks only as much as needed. Ewan cleans his hands with less water than you would use for a bowl, rubbing his knuckles hard where the thatch has scratched them. Una dampens the corner of cloth and works at the rim of her own cup. No one is made new. Everyone is made ready enough. The pail is lighter than it was when dusk found. You outside the door, you notice it when you tilt it and hear the water answer thinly against the side. That sound tells the truth of the evening as clearly as the meal chest or the peat stack. Morning will require more. Morning always does. But tonight, the pail has done what it could. It has softened soot, loosened meal, cooled sore fingers, and made the children's faces fit for sleep. You pour a little used water toward the place, near the threshold, where the floor will take it without complaint. The earth darkens, then drinks. Your hands, colder now. Find the cloth at your belt and dry against it. The wool gives back smoke, but also the faint comfort of your own body's heat. Somewhere above, the patched thatch holds. Beside you, the child's cheek is clean in one pale streak, the rest still belonging honestly to the cottage. You smooth the hair once, leaving the smoke where it is, because some things cannot be washed from a night until morning comes. Behind the timber screen, one of the cattle shifts her weight, and the whole cottage answers with a dull press of hoof into bedding. You set the cloth back at your belt and turn toward the sound, because this last look cannot be left to morning. In a house like this, the beasts are not apart from the family's life. They are milk in the bowl, dung for the ground, strength for hauling, and the difference between a winter endured and a winter feared. You bend past the rough posts where the partition has been rubbed smooth by shoulders and sleeves. The air changes at once. It is thicker here, heavy with hide, straw, damp earth, and the sour sweetness of fodder already breathed over. In the darkness, the cow is first a shape, then a flank under your palm, broad and living, warmer than the wall, with a tremor beneath the skin. Your hand rests there long enough to feel that she is settled. The tether is the next thing. Your fingers know the leather by its cracks, and the place where it has been mended with a strip cut from something older. Too tight, and the beast will pull and fret through the night. Too slack, and she may turn where she should not. Foul the wrong place, or catch herself badly before anyone wakes. You test the knot, tug once, and let it lie. Such checks are not fussing. They are household reckoning done by touch. Near her feet, the bedding has gathered into a ridge. You nudge it back with the side of your foot, spreading the used straw where it will take the worst of the night. Straw is not wasted, even when it is dirty. By morning, it will be muck. And muck is not refused to a cotter's household. It is future oats, future kail, future rent made possible by ground that has been fed, as surely as people must be fed. The smaller beast shifts behind her, and for a moment you hear the soft, wet sound of chewing. That sound has followed your married life more faithfully than any song. In your first winter here, when this house still felt like Ewan's mother's house, and not yet yours. You learned the byre in pieces, where not to step, which hide belong to which temper, how to move without startling a horn in the dark. Una did not need many words to teach it. Her hand would pause on a latch, or her eyes would find a careless knot. And your own hands learned to answer. Elend's shadow remains near the main room, giving space where there is barely space to give. This last care often falls to whoever has enough wakefulness left for it, and tonight it is yours. The child has gone still behind you, watching only until watching becomes too much trouble for tired eyes. Even a child knows that the animals are not decoration or company alone. A cow can stand in a winter night like stored wealth, breathing in the dark, needing food before she gives food back. You pass your palm once along the animal's side, feeling mud dried into the hair near the lower belly and the steady lift of her breath. Milk is not certain every season. Calves, fodder, weather, pasture, illness, and luck all have their say. Yet the hope of milk shapes the whole house. It changes what a child eats, what can be added to oats, what might be traded, what strength remains in a woman's body after work has taken most of it. The laird's hall may count rent in larger measures, but here survival is counted in handfuls, bowlfuls, and what can be kept alive until spring. At the far side, the latch has not dropped fully. You see it only because the last line of hearth light catches the edge of wood. You reach over the bedding, draw the bar into place, and press until it settles. The sound is plain, almost nothing. Yet it closes the night around all of you. Door, tether, bedding, roof, ash, meal chest, sleeping bodies, each must hold in its own way. When you step back through the screen, the smell of the byre follows in your skirts and hair. There is no keeping it separate. It belongs to the cottage as truly as peat smoke, oatmeal, wet wool, and the child's breathing. You pause just inside the main room. Listening once more, the cattle settle. The timber gives a faint creak. Then the house returns to its low breathing, with another part of the night made ready. The pot no longer needs to sit in the heart of the heat. You take the wrapped cloth in both hands, grip the blackened handle, and shift it a little to the side, where what remains inside will not burn fast or sour before morning. The iron gives back a dull heat through the cloth. Not enough to hurt, but enough to remind you how long the hearth has been working. All evening it has cooked, lit, dried, warmed, comforted, smoked, and kept the cattle side of the house from feeling wholly separate from the room where people sleep. Now it must be taught to last. You crouch where the floor has been swept clear in a half-moon around the hearthstone. The packed earth is gritty under your soles, and your knees know the place before your eyes settle there. A little red remains in the peat bed, tucked low under the grey surface, not flames now, but a hidden life. If you leave it too open, the fuel will go to waste, and the room may fill with sparks when no one is watching. If you smother it too heavily, morning will begin with cold ash, flint, breath, and impatient fingers. So you do what Una taught you in your first winter here, when you were still learning how this house kept itself alive after dark. With the edge of the hearthstick, you draw ash inward, not all at once, but in a thin cover over the reddest places. Ash is not only what the fire has finished with. At night it becomes a blanket, a guard, a way of slowing hunger. The peat beneath it glows and dims, taking less air, spending itself more carefully. Fuel is not an endless comfort in a cottage like this. Each block has been cut from wet ground, lifted, stacked, dried as weather allowed, carried home against hip and back. By bedtime, the heat in the hearth is also the memory of all that labour. Near the wall, the peats you brought in have darkened as their surface dries. You choose one that feels firm, not wet enough to hiss, and not so dry that it will flare away. It leaves a brown-black mark across your fingers. You lay it near the edge of the buried glow, close enough to catch later, far enough not to waste itself before the house has fully settled. Una watches from her place, her shape more shadow than face now, and you can feel, without looking, whether she approves. In a house with little spare fuel, correction often comes before a mistake becomes costly. The room changes as the hearth is lowered. Earlier, it made a centre around which every task gathered. The pot hung over it. Bowls were warmed beside it. Damp cloth was shifted near it. A child leaned too close and had to be drawn back. Hands opened over it after the door let in, on cold. Now the fire becomes something quieter. Something to be guarded rather than used. The walls step backward into darkness. The pegs vanish first, then the far edge of the meal chest. Then the corner where the folded plates lie ready for bodies. You move the iron tools where no sleeping foot will find them. The hook is set back. The pot chain hangs slack. A spoon rests bowl down, rinsed as well as the water allowed. The last scraps of oat cling pale to the inside of a wooden bowl, and you turn it so that it will dry clean enough for morning. Nothing is truly finished. Morning will ask for the same things again. Heat, water, meal, fodder, patience. But the evening has its own ending, and this is part of it. The putting away of danger, the saving of what can be saved. Smoke slips low for a moment when the ash shifts, then thins toward the dark above. Your eyes sting, and you blink it clear. The thatch has held this smoke for years. It is in the rafters, in the hanging cloth, in the wool at your shoulder, in the hair of the child already drowsing near Una. A better hall may have a chimney, a wider hearth, more servants to tend what burns. Here the fire is close to everyone because the house cannot afford distance. Its nearness gives heat, and its nearness must be managed. At last the red is mostly hidden. Only a dull pulse shows through one broken place in the ash, like breath seen through cloth. You leave it so. There must be a sign that the heart of it remains. Your hands are dark at the fingertips, and when you rub them together, fine dust catches in the lines of your skin. The room is no longer a kitchen, not quite a workroom, not yet a bedchamber. It is turning into the night version of itself. Behind the screen, the cow shifts once, then settles. Near the hearth, Un draws her feet in under her skirt. Alan's shoulders lower in the gloom. The child's breathing goes loose and open. You sit back on your heels for one last look at the covered peat, the moved pot, the cooled iron, the shrinking wall of light. The fire has not gone out. It has only been asked to keep faith until morning. The bedding comes out in the order the house knows. A pallet is drawn from against the wall, shaken once, and laid where the floor is driest. The straw inside it has flattened with use, but it still gives a little under the hand. Una's place is nearest the hearthstone, not because she is helpless, but because age has earned that nearness, and because she will be the first to hear if the banked peat fails before dawn. You lift the folded plaids from their peg. They smell of wool, smoke, and weather held from many days. One goes over the child, who has already lost the struggle to keep awake. Another is kept for you and Yuan. Its edge rubbed thin where hands have pulled it up in the dark. Outer clothes are not thrown aside. They are folded and set within reach, because morning work begins cold, and because cloth is too valuable to be treated as if another set waits in a chest. There is a curtained corner, if it can be called that. A hanging length of worn cloth, a board set low, a little space made by habit more than by building. It gives you and Yuan the nearest thing the cottage has to privacy. In a richer house, a bed might stand as furniture, raised from the floor and screened from drafts. Here, separation is made from wool, patience, and the courtesy of people turning their faces away. The child is tucked close enough to Una that an arm can find him if he stirs. Children sleep where they can be warmed and noticed. That is affection, and it is also sense. In a house like this, love does not always have its own room. It has a place under the same covering, a saved crust, a hand checking a forehead without making a ceremony of it. A body shifted, so another body can lie out of the draft. You loosen what can be loosened. The belt comes away. The knife is placed near your folded clothes, not as drama, but as one more necessary tool that must not be lost in darkness. Your sark clings faintly where the day's smoke and washing have met in the cloth. Your hair holds the room's air. Even sleep will not make you separate from the cottage. You carry the house with you into the bedding, as everyone here does. Yuan settles last. After looking once toward the door bar and once toward the partition. That is part of being the man of this roof. Though Una's memory and your hands keep as much of it standing as his labour does. He lies down with the heaviness of someone whose body has been bent by field, peat, animal, and weather. The floor creaks under his weight. Then stills, behind the screen, the cow breathes in her own dark. Her presence takes space that no guest chamber would allow, yet her milk, manure, warmth, and worth are part of why the household can last another season. She sleeps under the same roof because wealth here is not hidden in a locked room. It shifts, chews, steams, and must be kept alive through the night. When you draw the plaid over yourself, the wool is coarse at the chin. The closeness of everyone is not always easy. There are knees, elbows, breath, the scratch of straw. The knowledge that no one's turning is entirely private. But there is also the plain comfort of being accounted for. In the dark, the cottage gathers its people by need, kinship, age, and heat, holding each body where it can be sheltered until morning. The wind goes on working at the thatch after everyone else has stopped. It worries the roof in low passes, then falls back, as if crossing the dark fields and returning to try another edge. The house answers with its own familiar sounds. A reed shifting overhead, a timber giving one tired click. The hidden peat holding its red heart under ash. You do not sleep at once. Your body has been moving since, before the light came cleanly over the yard, and now, when it is allowed to rest, it remembers each task in order. The pail, the pot, the cloth, the child, the cow, the meal chest, the door bar. Your hands lie open near your body, no longer twisting wool or rinsing wood or searching for what must be saved until morning. In the darkness, the cottage is more than its walls. The strip of land outside is here, because its grain waits in the chest. The laird is here, though his hall stands elsewhere, because rent has shaped the way the oats were measured and the hen was counted in memory. The parish kirk is here, faint as a bell remembered through weather. Una is here in the order of the pots. Yuan is here in the stacked peat and the checked bar. The children are here in the way everyone has made room. A child turns in sleep, straw whispering under a plaid. The movement is clumsy and trusting, and then still again. Behind the partition, the cow breathes out with a damp. Heavy patience, her tether holds, her warmth leaks through the boards and rough screen. Outside, the night belongs to wind, wet ground, and whatever crosses the fields unseen. Inside, it belongs to breath, ash, wool, milk, grain, and the labour already spent. Nothing in this house is separate for long. Food is also rent. Fuel is also time. An animal is also wealth. A bed is also a place made by kinship and need. A chest is also tomorrow's question. Even rest is not idleness here. It is how the body keeps enough strength to rise when the room begins to pale. And yet, in this last hour, the cottage asks nothing more of you. The pot is set aside. The embers are covered. The door is barred. The child has turned once and settled. The meal chest waits in darkness with its cloth drawn over. Neither full enough for ease, nor empty enough for fear. It simply waits, as everything in the house waits for morning. Your breathing begins to match the roof's old patience. Not a grand house. Not a poor picture to be pitied from far away. Just a lived room under weather, holding people, animals, food, faith, debt, memory, and sleep together for one more ordinary night. Sleep well, stay warm, be kind to the people in your house, and I will see you in the next one. Good night.